The hour is late, and the world beyond the harbor wall has dissolved into a singular, rhythmic grey. You are listening to the first entry of the Maritime Sleep Chronicles, a collection of quiet records gathered from the salt-stained ledgers of the 19th century. There is no haste here. There is only the steady, unhurried pulse of the tide and the slow, deliberate turning of pages long settled into the scent of old cedar and dried ink. Imagine, if you will, the weight of a heavy wool coat upon your shoulders. Feel the stillness of a stone-walled room where the only light comes from a single oil lamp, its flame small and steady, casting a soft, amber glow across a desk of scarred oak. We begin our journey not with a departure, but with an arrival at the edge of the known world, where the air is thin and cold, and the silence of the north is a physical presence, vast and undisturbed. October the 14th, 1841. The log of the Barque Hesperus currently moored in the lee of a nameless basalt headland. The entries are written in a meticulous, sloping hand, the ink faded to the color of dried kelp. The captain's voice, through these written words, is one of profound patience. He notes the temperature of the sea as if he were counting the breaths of a sleeping giant. The water is 42 degrees. The wind has fallen away to a whisper, leaving the rigging to hang in long, graceful curves of hemp and tar. There is a sound, specific to this latitude, of the ship settling into the slush ice, a soft, granular grinding, like the turning of a heavy key in a well-oiled lock. It is a sound that signifies rest. The crew has retreated below decks, where the air is thick with the smell of toasted oats and the low hum of quiet conversation. There is no urgency in their movements. They move with the deliberate slowness of men who have accepted the pace of the seasons. In the lighthouse at Cape Mercy, the keeper's journal reflects a similar quality of stillness. His task is the maintenance of the light, a clockwork mechanism of brass and crystal that requires his constant, gentle attention. He writes of the oil, the clear, viscous oil that feeds the wick. He describes the process of trimming the charred edge of the cotton, a task performed with small, silver shears. It is a quiet ritual. The snip of the blades is lost against the immense, distant boom of the surf against the outer reef, a sound so constant it has become a form of silence. The lantern room is a sanctuary of glass. Outside, the sleet brushes against the panes with the sound of fine sand being scattered by a hand. Inside, the heat from the lamp creates a small, dry pocket of warmth. The keeper notes the arrival of a single kittiwake, resting for an hour on the gallery railing before disappearing back into the dusk. He records this with the same gravity he accords to the moon's phases. To him, every small movement is a part of the greater machinery of the coast. The expedition notes of the schooner Isabella speak of the white darkness. This is not the darkness of the night, but the softness of a fog so dense it seems to muffle the very passage of time. The ship is adrift, though safely so, caught in a slow-moving current that carries it past icebergs the size of cathedrals. The naturalist on board writes of the ice. He does not speak of its danger, but of its colors, veins of deep, translucent cobalt buried within the white, like the blood of the earth frozen in place. He spends his afternoons at a small folding table, sketching the frost patterns that form on the interior of his cabin window. They are like ferns, he writes, or the delicate lace of a Victorian collar. His charcoal moves slowly across the grain of the paper. Outside, the world is a study in monochrome. The sky and the sea have merged into a seamless veil of pearl gray, and the ship moves through it as if suspended in a dream. There is no horizon. There is only the gentle rise and fall of the hull, a slow, rhythmic rocking that mimics the heartbeat of the deep. The harbour ledger of a small whaling station in the South Shetlands tells a story of endurance through the medium of inventory. Lists of heavy timber, casks of salt beef, and rolls of spare canvas. These are the materials of a life lived in stasis. The clerk writes with a heavy nib, his entries punctuated by long descriptions of the weather. November the 3rd, a light dusting of snow upon the pier. The stones are slick with frozen spray. He describes the way the light catches the brass fittings of the telescope on the lookout tower, a brief, golden flash in an otherwise muted landscape. There is a profound sense of safety in these lists. To have enough coal for the stove, enough oil for the lamps, and enough tobacco for the long winter evenings is to be at peace. He notes the sound of the wind in the chimney, a low, melodic moan that serves as a lullaby for the men in the bunkhouse. They sleep deeply, wrapped in heavy blankets, their dreams filled with the steady creak of the station's timbers. Return now to the Hesperus where the evening watch has begun. The sailor on duty is not watching for storms, but simply witnessing the night. He paces the deck, his boots making a dull, comforting thud on the frosted planks. He stops by the binnacle, where the compass floats in its bath of spirits, the needle pointing unwaveringly toward the magnetic north. It is a small, quiet miracle of physics. The lamp inside the binnacle glows softly, illuminating the points of the compass card, north, north by northeast, east. The sailor breathes in the air, which smells of salt and old rope and the faint, metallic tang of the coming snow. He watches the stars, which are sharp and brilliant in the clear Arctic air. They do not twinkle so much as glow with a steady, ancient light. He feels the vastness of the space around him, yet he is not afraid. The ship is a sturdy shell, a world unto itself, and he is its silent guardian. In the journals of the Arctic explorers, there is often a mention of the Eisblink, the strange, luminous glow on the horizon caused by the reflection of light off the distant pack ice. It is a soft, ethereal radiance that seems to emanate from the Earth itself. One surgeon, writing in 1854, describes spending hours on the bridge simply watching this light. It does not flicker. It remains constant, a pale, milky band that separates the dark sea from the darker sky. He writes of the way it calms the mind, stripping away the anxieties of the day until nothing remains but the act of observation. He notes the way his own breath forms a small cloud of steam in front of him, drifting away into the rigging like a ghost. The ship is frozen fast for the season, and there is nowhere to go. This realization is not a burden, but a relief. The struggle against the elements has ceased, replaced by a quiet acceptance of the winter's rain. The lighthouse keeper at Cape Mercy climbs the spiral stairs once more. His hand follows the curve of the cold iron railing, a familiar path taken 1,000 times. Each step is a measured movement. At the top, he pauses to listen to the rotation of the lens. It moves on a bed of mercury, a silent, frictionless glide. The weights that drive the clockwork descend slowly through the center of the tower, a steady, rhythmic descent that measures the passage of the night. He looks out through the glass. The beacon sweeps across the dark water, a long, reaching finger of light that touches the crests of the waves for a fleeting second before moving on. It is a pulse, a heartbeat of light in the darkness. He sits in his wooden chair, the upholstery worn smooth by years of use, and picks up his book. The wind howls in the ventilators, but here, in the heart of the tower, it is warm and still. The smell of the oil lamp is a familiar companion, a scent that speaks of home and duty and the long, slow hours of the watch. the ledger at the harbor station records the arrival of a small boat from a neighboring island. They bring news of nothing in particular, a change in the current, the sighting of a pod of narwhals, the fact that the moss on the northern slope is turning brown. These small details are recorded with the same precision as a lunar eclipse. In this remote corner of the world, the small is the great. The clerk describes the way the men drink their tea, holding the warm mugs in both hands, the steam rising to dampen their eyebrows. He notes the texture of the wool of their sweaters, thick and oily and smelling of the sheep that produced it. There is a sense of communal warmth, a shared understanding of the value of a fire and a roof. The evening ends with the closing of the ledger, the heavy cover meeting the pages with a soft, final thud. The ink is dry. The day is accounted for. On the Isabella the naturalist is now writing by the light of a single candle. The flame is steady, for there are no drafts in his small, well-insulated cabin. He is writing about the silence. It is not an empty silence, he claims, but a full one, packed with the weight of the ice and the pressure of the deep water. He describes how, if one listens closely enough, one can hear the ice talking, a series of low pops and groans as the pressure ridges shift and settle. It is a subterranean language, a conversation between the earth and the sea. He finds it deeply comforting. It reminds him that the world is alive, even in its most frozen reaches. He lays down his pen and listens. The ship gives a tiny, sympathetic creak. He closes his eyes and imagines the forest of masts in a faraway harbor, the trees they once were, and the quiet strength they still possess. The night deepens. On the bridge of the Hesperus the watch has changed. The new man takes his place with a nod of acknowledgement. There is no need for many words. The instructions are simple: keep the lamp trimmed, watch the ice, listen for the tide. He leans against the railing, his gloved hands resting on the cold wood. He watches the moon rise, a pale, silver sliver that casts long, distorted shadows across the hummocks of ice. The world is a landscape of silver and charcoal. The water in the leads is black and still as polished obsidian. Every now and then, a small piece of ice breaks away and drifts past the hull with a soft, shushing sound, like silk rubbing against silk. The sailor feels a sense of profound belonging. He is a small part of a vast, indifferent, and beautiful system. He is content to wait for the morning, knowing that it will come in its own time, with its own slow, grey light. In the lighthouse, the keeper has fallen into a light doze, his head resting against the back of his chair. He is not asleep, but floating in that middle space where the sounds of the world become a part of the internal landscape. The rhythmic sweep of the light, the tick of the clockwork, the sigh of the wind, they are all one. He dreams of the sea, not as a tempestuous force, but as a vast, undulating blanket of green and blue. He sees the kelp forest swaying in the slow currents, the fish moving in silver clouds through the sun-dappled water. It is a dream of infinite peace. When he stirs to check the oil, he does so with a sense of continuity. The dream and the reality are not so different. Both are governed by the same slow, inevitable laws. He adjusts the wick, a tiny movement of his fingers, and the flame responds with a steady, unwavering glow. The expedition notes of the Isabella contain a final entry for the night. The surgeon has visited the sick bay, not to tend to any illness, but simply to check the temperature. The air is cool and crisp. The men are sleeping soundly, their breathing synchronized with the gentle movement of the ship. One man is snoring softly, a low, rhythmic sound that adds to the overall sense of tranquility. The surgeon notes that the health of the crew is excellent, attributed to the lack of haste and the abundance of rest. They have learned to live at the speed of the ice. He returns to his own bunk and pulls the heavy duvet up to his chin. The wood of the ship is all around him, a protective cocoon that has weathered 100 storms and is now resting, just as he is. He feels the slight vibration of the hull as a distant wave taps against the side. It is a gentle reminder of the world outside, a world that is vast and cold, but also deeply, undeniably still. The harbour ledger is tucked away in its drawer. The clerk has gone to bed. The station is dark, save for a single lamp in the window of the lookout tower. The snow is falling more steadily now, a fine, dry powder that accumulates in the crevices of the stones and the folds of the canvas covers on the whaleboats. It muffles all sound, turning the station into a world of cotton wool. The only movement is the slow descent of the flakes, each one a tiny, unique crystal of ice. They settle on the masts and the rigging, outlining the ship in a delicate, white filigree. It is a transformation of the ordinary into the extraordinary, achieved through the simple accumulation of time and silence. As we conclude this first segment of the Maritime Sleep Chronicles, let the image of the snow-covered harbour stay with you. Feel the weight of the blankets, the warmth of the room, and the steady, unhurried pulse of the sea. There is no need to move. There is no need to think of the morning. There is only the long, deep reach of the night, the steady glow of the lighthouse, and the quiet strength of the ships resting in the ice. The logs are closed, the lamps are dimmed, and the world is at peace. Sleep now, caught in the gentle ebb and flow of the tide, as the white darkness of the north settles over the land and the sea alike. The journey has only just begun, and there is all the time in the world to reach the horizon. For now, there is only the stillness, the salt, and the slow, rhythmic breath of the sleeping ocean. The hour is deep, and the light within the lantern room is a steady, rhythmic pulse that governs the dark. We find ourselves now in the transition between the late watch and the grey stillness of the pre-dawn, where the ink in the ledger flows slowly, cooling in the well as the temperature drops within the stone walls of the gallery. There is a particular quality to the silence of a remote station in the mid-19th century, a silence that is not an absence of sound, but a layering of many soft, rhythmic pressures. There is the slow, heavy drip of condensation from the iron rafters, the rhythmic rasp of the clockwork mechanism that rotates the great Fresnel lens, and the muffled, eternal respiration of the cold sea against the basalt foundation. Turning the heavy vellum pages of the station log, we find the entries for the month of November, recorded in a hand that is disciplined, upright, and weary. The ink has faded to a soft sepia, the color of dried kelp. The keeper notes the consumption of oil with a precision that borders on the sacred, so many gallons of colza oil burned to maintain the flame, a steady nourishment for the light that guards the jagged hem of the continent. One can almost smell the thick, vegetal scent of the oil, the faint metallic tang of the brass reflectors, and the pervasive aroma of damp wool coats drying near the small coal stove in the watchroom below. It is a world measured in wicks and weights, in the winding of chains and the polishing of glass until the surface disappears into a pure, invisible clarity. Beyond the thick glass of the lantern, the North Atlantic is a vast, restless shadow. The sleet arrives not as a storm, but as a gentle, persistent brushing against the panes, a sound like frozen silk. It is the sound of the high latitudes, where the air is heavy with the salt of 1,000 miles of open water. In the logs of the Arctic expeditions, those vessels that push northward into the white unknown, the descriptions of the ice are equally measured, equally calm. The journals of the HMS Enterprise speak of the ship being laid up for the season, a term that suggests a tucking in, a folding of the wooden wings. The timbers of the hull, seasoned oak and elm, groan softly as the young ice begins to bridge the gaps between the floes, a slow, crystalline architecture that binds the ship to the geography of the pole. There is no haste in these records. The expeditions understood that time in the ice is different from time in the harbor. It is a slow, white clock. The men spent their days in the dim light of the 'tween decks, where the air was thick with the steam of boiling salt pork and the comforting, earthy smell of old ropes. They recorded the barometric pressure every hour, the numbers forming long, hypnotic columns of stability. They noted the appearance of the moon, a pale, frosted coin hanging over the pressure ridges, and the way the aurora borealis would sometimes ghost across the sky in ribbons of silent, spectral green, casting no shadow and making no sound. It was a landscape of subtraction, where everything unnecessary was stripped away by the wind, leaving only the essential wood of the ship and the essential spirit of the crew. In the lighthouse, the keeper's hand moves across the page, documenting the state of the tide. The water rises and falls with a heavy, predictable grace, uncovering the dark, slick ribs of the reef at low water, then burying them again beneath a shroud of white foam. The tide marks on the stone are a history of the ocean's breath. One can imagine the keeper looking out at the horizon, where the line between the sea and the sky has dissolved into a single, seamless indigo. There is a profound comfort in this lack of definition, a blurring of boundaries that allows the mind to drift like a vessel without an anchor, floating in a calm, dark medium where the only constant is the rotation of the light. The logs mention the maintenance of the fog bell, a massive casting of bronze that stands ready on the gallery. Its voice, when called upon, is a deep, sonorous bronze thrum that vibrates through the very marrow of the lighthouse, a sound that travels through the thickest white mists to warn the passing barques of the hidden stone. But tonight, the air is clear enough for the light to reach its full distance. The beam sweeps over the water, a long, luminous finger searching the waves, finding only the white crests of the rollers and the occasional dark shape of a drifting log or a sleeping petrel. The light does not seek to disturb, it merely observes, a silent witness to the immense, unpeopled reaches of the sea. In the Arctic logs, we find mentions of the wintering over preparations. The ships were often banked with snow to provide insulation, turning the wooden hulls into white mounds that mimicked the surrounding floes. Inside, the stoves were kept low, a dull orange glow in the center of the mess. The sailors would occupy themselves with the repair of sails, the needles passing through the heavy canvas with a rhythmic hiss. They would read by the light of tallow candles, the flame steady in the still air of the hold. There was a great deal of waiting for the sun to return, waiting for the ice to groan and fracture, waiting for the world to turn back toward the light. This waiting was not a period of anxiety, but a period of deep, restorative stillness, a hibernation of the will. The ledger of the harbor master, some 300 miles to the south, reflects a different kind of quiet. Here, the entries are for vessels that have sought the sanctuary of the lee shore. A schooner from the Grand Banks, its deck silvered with a thin crust of ice, a brigantine carrying timber from the northern forests, smelling of pine resin and cold damp earth. They lie at anchor in the harbor, their masts like a leafless forest against the darkening sky. The sound of the water lapping against their hulls is a delicate, musical percussion. The harbor master notes the arrival of each, the name of the captain, the weight of the cargo, the port of origin. It is a litany of names, the Sarah Sands, the Northern Star, the Mary of Bristol, names that carry the weight of long journeys and the promise of rest. As the night deepens, the keeper of the light might take a moment to step out onto the gallery, wrapped in a heavy bridge coat. The air is sharp, a cold that clarifies the senses. The stars above are brilliant and hard, like salt spilled on a dark cloth. From this height, the world feels vast and ancient, a place where the human presence is a small, flickering wick in a cathedral of stone and water. The sound of the surf below is a constant, low-frequency roar, a sound that has not changed in 10,000 years. It is the sound of the Earth's edges being smoothed, a slow, geological erasure that is both humbling and deeply peaceful. Returning to the warmth of the watch room, the keeper adjusts the wick of the lamp. The flame is a steady, golden almond, reflecting in the polished brass of the instruments. The chronometer on the wall ticks with a dry, mechanical precision, marking the passage of the hours toward the dawn. There is a sense of stewardship here, a responsibility to the unseen mariners who rely on this pulse of light. It is a quiet duty, performed in the solitude of the night, a dialogue between the keeper and the sea. The logs record no great dramas, only the steady performance of task after task, the cleaning of the glass, the trimming of the wick, the recording of the wind direction. It is in this repetition that the peace of the station is found. In the journals of the 1845 expedition, there is a description of a silent Sunday. The ships were frozen fast in the Victoria Strait. The commander describes the crew gathered on the ice, the sky a bruised purple, the air so still that a whisper could carry for a mile. They sang a hymn, their voices thin and clear in the immense cold, the sound rising up toward the indifferent stars and then vanishing into the frost. The ice acted as a vast sounding board, carrying the vibration of their presence into the deep, dark water beneath the floes. They felt the scale of the world then, not as something to be conquered, but as something to be inhabited with a quiet, enduring patience. The sleet against the lighthouse window has turned to a soft, wet snow. The flakes are large and heavy, drifting down through the beam of the light like ghostly moths. They settle on the iron railing of the gallery, building up a soft, white cushion that dampens the world even further. The sea below has become a muffled, grey expanse, the white cap softened by the falling snow. Inside the lantern room, the heat from the lamps creates a small, warm microclimate, a sanctuary of golden light in the heart of the winter night. The keeper's pen scratches softly across the paper, finalizing the entry for the 4 o'clock watch. Wind veering north-northwest. Visibility moderate. All lamps burning bright. There is a quality to this late-night record-keeping that mimics the act of prayer. It is an acknowledgement of the world as it is, a steadying of the mind against the vastness of the dark. The ledger becomes a companion, a witness to the passage of time. The handwriting, though tired, remains clear, a testament to the discipline of the service. Each letter is formed with care, the descenders of the GS and YS curling like the tails of sea creatures. The ink dries slowly in the cool air, leaving a faint sheen on the surface of the paper before it sinks into the fibers of the vellum. In the hold of the Arctic ship, the sound of the ice pressing against the hull is described as a low, musical humming, a vibration that resonates through the oak ribs and into the hammocks of the sleeping men. It is the sound of the Earth's crust shifting, a slow-motion collision of giants. But within the ship, there is safety. The thick layers of felt and timber provide a cocoon against the -40-degree air. The men sleep deeply, their breath forming small clouds of frost that vanish in the dim light of the oil lamps. They dream of green fields and the smell of warm earth, but their bodies are attuned to the rhythm of the ship, the slight, occasional tilt as the ice adjusts its grip. The lighthouse keeper looks at the barometer. The needle is steady, a silver finger pointing to sphere, despite the snow. The pressure is high, the air heavy and still. This stability is reflected in the keeper's own movements, the way he moves from the desk to the lantern, his boots making a dull thud on the stone floor, his hands knowing the exact tension required to adjust the vents. There is no urgency, only the smooth, practiced economy of motion that comes from years of solitude. He is a part of the machinery of the light, a human gear in a clockwork world. The transitions between the watches are seamless. The next keeper will arrive shortly, a quiet exchange of information, the state of the oil, the direction of the wind, and then the first keeper will descend the spiral staircase to his small, neat bunk. The transition is marked by the soft clink of a latch and the distant sound of a door closing. The lighthouse continues its work, indifferent to the change in personnel. The light remains the same, a steady, rotating promise. In the harbor journals, the entries for the night are often sparse. Midnight. Moon obscured by cloud. Harbor quiet. 2 ships at anchor. It is the record of a world at rest. The water in the basin is as still as a dark mirror, reflecting the few lights from the town and the silhouettes of the rigging. The smell of the harbor is complex, a mixture of salt, rotting seaweed, wet hemp, and the faint, sweet smell of wood smoke from the galley fires. It is a scent that speaks of arrival and the cessation of effort. The ships, having battled the currents and the gales of the open sea, now sit motionless, their anchors buried deep in the soft, ancient mud of the harbor floor. The logs of the expeditions often mention the ice blink, a strange, luminous glow on the horizon that signaled the presence of distant ice fields. It was a light that seemed to come from nowhere, a pale, ethereal wash that illuminated the underside of the clouds. In the journals, it is described with a sense of wonder, a celestial phenomenon that guided the ships through the labyrinth of the pack. It was a quiet light, a light that did not burn, but merely shimmered, like the reflection of a star in a frozen pond. As we linger in these records, the pacing of our own thoughts begins to slow, matching the deliberate tempo of the 19th century hand. We see the world through the eyes of the keepers and the explorers, a world of vast distances, slow communications, and the profound importance of the small, local detail. A leaking cask of vinegar, the loss of a brass compass, the sighting of a snowy owl on the masthead, these are the events that populate the pages. They are recorded with the same gravity as the discovery of a new coastline or the passing of a great storm. All things are part of the ledger, all things are part of the journey. The damp wool of the keeper's coat begins to steam slightly as it hangs near the stove. The scent is comforting, earthy, and familiar. It is the smell of a life lived in proximity to the elements, a life where the boundary between the person and the environment is porous and thin. The warmth of the room is a precious commodity, a small island of comfort in the sea of the night. The keeper sits back in his chair, his eyes following the sweep of the light as it passes across the distant horizon. He is not looking for anything in particular, he is simply looking, a meditative act that occupies the hours between the tasks. In the Arctic, the ships would sometimes be caught in the ice for years. The journals from these periods are masterpieces of quiet observation. They describe the way the snow forms drifts against the leeward side of the ship, the way the frost patterns grow on the inside of the portholes like delicate, crystalline ferns. They record the sounds of the ice tongues licking against the hull, a sound like 1,000 small fingers tapping on the wood. There is a sense of being part of a larger, slower process, a witness to the slow grinding of the world's gears. The men did not fight the ice, they resided within it, waiting for the seasons to turn, waiting for the sun to reclaim the sky. The lighthouse ledger shows that the sun will rise at 6:42 a.m. The keeper notes this with a small mark in the margin. The transition from the artificial light of the lantern to the natural light of the day is the final movement of the night symphony. It is a slow, gradual brightening, a thinning of the dark until the horizon begins to bleed a pale, cold grey. The stars fade one by one, their light absorbed by the increasing luminosity of the atmosphere. The lighthouse doesn't stop its rotation until the sun is fully above the horizon, a final, overlapping gesture of guardianship. In the logs of the HMS Investigator, there is a passage about the great stillness of the polar night. The writer notes that even the sound of his own heart seemed loud in the absolute quiet of the ice. He describes the sensation of the ship being held in a giant, frozen hand, a hand that was both firm and protective. This feeling of being held, of being contained within a larger, non-human order, is a recurring theme in these maritime records. Whether it is the lighthouse held by the stone or the ship held by the ice, there is a profound sense of placement, of being exactly where one is meant to be. The ink in the keeper's well has settled. The last entry for the night is finished. The script is steady, the lines even. The keeper closes the ledger, the heavy covers meeting with a soft, muffled thud. The sound is final, a period at the end of a long, quiet sentence. He stands and stretches, his joints making a faint clicking sound in the silence of the room. He looks out one last time at the sea, which is now beginning to take on the color of pewter. The waves are long and rolling, coming in from the deep with a rhythmic, unhurried power. The smell of the morning air, even inside the lighthouse, begins to change. It becomes sharper, fresher, carrying the scent of the coming day. The oil lamps in the lantern room continue to hum, their work nearly done. The brass surfaces reflect the growing light of the sky, turning from a warm gold to a cool, metallic silver. The transition is almost complete. The night, with its long shadows and rhythmic pulses, is folding itself away, like a chart being rolled up and placed back in its tube. In the Arctic journals, the return of the sun was a quiet event. There were no cheers, only a silent standing on the deck, watching as a thin sliver of gold appeared on the southern horizon for a few minutes before disappearing again. It was a promise kept, a confirmation of the cyclical nature of the world. The sailors would return to their tasks, the scraping of the decks, the mending of the lines, with a renewed sense of purpose, but the same steady, unhurried pace. They had learned the lesson of the ice. That time is not something to be spent, but something to be inhabited. The lighthouse keeper begins the process of extinguishing the lamps. He does it one by one, a deliberate reversal of the evening's ritual. As each flame goes out, the room becomes a little cooler, a little more aligned with the outside world. The rotation of the lens slows and then stops, the grey glass facets coming to rest in their designated positions. The silence that follows is profound. The mechanical heartbeat of the station has ceased, leaving only the sound of the wind and the sea. This is the moment of deepest peace, the threshold between the watch and the rest. The keeper moves down the stairs, his hand sliding along the smooth stone of the wall. Each step is a descent into a more domestic quiet, away from the grand scale of the lantern room and into the small, intimate spaces of the living quarters. The transition is gentle, a slow fading of responsibility. The world is now in the hands of the day, and the day is bright and cold and vast. The logs, the ledgers, and the journals are left behind in the watch room, their pages filled with the quiet history of the night. They are the artifacts of a time when the world was measured by the speed of a sailing ship and the endurance of a stone tower. They speak to us across the centuries in a language of calm, of steady duty, and of a deep, resonant connection to the rhythmic life of the sea. They remind us that there is a beauty in the slow passage of time, in the careful recording of the wind and the tide, and in the steady, unwavering light that guides us through the dark. As we drift towards sleep, we carry these images with us: the polished brass, the frozen rigging, the rhythmic sweep of the lens, and the smell of old paper and cold salt air. We are like the ships at anchor in the harbor, held safely in the lee of the land, our own rhythms slowing to match the long, easy breathing of the ocean. The world is large, and we are small, but we are part of the ledger, part of the record, part of the long, maritime chronicle that continues, page after silent page, into the infinite grey of the dawn. The cold of the stone walls now feels like a protective shell, a solid barrier against the restless movements of the outer world. Inside, there is only the warmth of the fading coal in the stove and the soft, rhythmic sound of a world at rest. The snow continues to fall outside, a silent, white blanket that covers the reef, the harbor, and the distant, frozen ships. It is a time for stillness, for the closing of eyes, and for the slow, deep descent into the quiet reaches of the night, where the only light is the one we carry within, a steady, golden flame that burns bright against the dark. The candle within the brass lantern flickers with a slow, rhythmic pulse, casting a long and amber shadow across the vellum pages of the logbook. Here, in the small, circular room of the lighthouse gallery, the world is reduced to the scent of whale oil and the distant, muffled percussion of the North Atlantic against the granite base. It is the 4th hour of the middle watch. The date, inscribed in a steady, copperplate hand, marks the transition into the deep winter of 1884. There is no haste in the turning of the page. The paper is heavy, slightly damp from the salt air that breathes through the masonry, and it carries the faint, metallic scent of the inkwell. Outside, the night is a vast and seamless tapestry of charcoal and indigo, where the horizon has dissolved entirely, leaving only the steady, sweeping beam of the Fresnel lens to mark the boundary between the sea and the sky. The light rotates with a mechanical deliberation, a clockwork heartbeat that governs the silence. One can hear the faint, rhythmic clinking of the brass weights descending within the central shaft, a sound so consistent it becomes a form of stillness itself. The gears are coated in a thin film of cold-pressed oil, moving with a silent, fluid grace that has remained unchanged through 1,000 nights of gale and calm. It is a lonely vigil, yet it is a loneliness filled with the presence of the sea, a constant, low-frequency hum that vibrates through the soles of one's boots. The stone walls, 4 feet thick at the gallery level, hold the cold of a century, yet within this small circle of lamplight, there is a profound sense of enclosure and safety. In the logs of the Arctic expedition ships, those wooden hulls currently locked in the grip of the northern ice, the entries reflect a similar suspension of time. Imagine the HMS Resolute, her timbers groaning softly under the immense pressure of the pack ice, a sound like the settling of an old house magnified by the silence of the frost. The sailors below decks are wrapped in blankets of heavy, undyed wool, their breath blooming in the dim light of the tallow dips. There is no movement on the surface of the world. The ship has become a static object, a wooden island in a sea of frozen white peaks and troughs. The journals speak of the frost rime that grows like silver ferns along the iron bolts of the bulkheads, and the way the tea cools in the pot before the first steam has even vanished. The narrative of the sea is one of slow accumulation. It is the steady drip of condensation from a copper pipe, it is the gradual accumulation of salt crystals on the windowpane, it is the way the tide retreats from the rocks, revealing the dark, glistening ribbons of kelp that sway in the shallows like the hair of some sleeping giant. To watch the sea from a height is to witness the slow unfolding of a great, grey cloth draped over the hidden contours of the earth. There is no hurry in the waves. They arrive at the shore with a weary, practiced motion, sliding over the smooth pebbles with a sound like the rustle of silk against stone. Each retreat leaves a line of white foam, a temporary script written upon the sand, only to be erased and rewritten by the next influx of cold, dark water. In the lighthouse, the keeper's hand moves across the ledger with the same unhurried precision as the rotating light. The entries are brief, stripped of all but the essential observations. Wind north-northwest. Visibility 10 miles. Sea state, moderate. Oil consumed, 3 pints. All lamps burning clear. These are the anchors of a life lived in increments of light and shadow. The brass instruments, the barometer with its delicate, trembling needle, the anemometer spinning slowly on the roof, the chronometer ticking with a dry, metallic precision, are the only witnesses to the passage of the hours. They do not measure time in the way of the world below. They measure the pressure of the atmosphere and the weight of the air, the subtle shifts in the earth's temperament that precede the falling of the snow or the lifting of the fog. When the fog arrives, it does so without sound. It is a soft, grey erasure that begins at the edge of the world and moves inward, swallowing the distant headlands and the navigation buoys until only the immediate circle of the lighthouse remains. The light, usually a sharp and piercing spear, becomes a soft, diffused glow, a golden halo suspended in a sea of mist. The sound of the sea changes then, it becomes muffled and directionless, as if the water were being filtered through layers of heavy velvet. This is the time of the foghorn, a deep, resonant moan that vibrates in the chest, a sound born of steam and iron that carries for miles across the unseen waves. It is a lonely sound, but it is also a guiding one, a steady reassurance that the land is still there, firm and unyielding beneath the mantle of the grey. Deep in the logs of the Franklin search parties, one finds descriptions of the aurora borealis, described not as a spectacle, but as a quiet, shifting presence in the sky. The sailors would stand on the deck of the icebound ship, their faces stung by the dry, crystalline cold, watching the curtains of pale green and violet light drift across the stars. There was no sound to the lights, only the immense, ringing silence of the Arctic night, a silence so profound that one could hear the blood pulsing in one's own ears. The ice would occasionally crack with a sound like a distant gunshot, a reminder of the colossal forces at play beneath the stillness. But for the most part, the world was a study in white and blue, a landscape of frozen stillness where the only movement was the slow, rhythmic breathing of the men in their bunks. Back in the lighthouse, the heat from the oil lamps keeps the frost from the glass. The air inside is warm and carries the scent of seasoned oak and old tobacco. There is a small stove in the corner, its iron belly glowing a faint, dull red, providing a steady, radiating warmth that combats the chill of the stone. A tin mug of coffee sits on the wooden table, the surface of the liquid perfectly still, reflecting the golden circle of the lamp above. It is a moment of absolute equilibrium. The world outside is a chaos of wind and water, but here, within the circle of the light, there is only the steady, unhurried progression of the watch. The keeper thinks of the ships that are perhaps out there, beyond the reach of his vision, their hulls rising and falling in the long, slow swells of the deep ocean. He thinks of the helmsmen with their hands frozen to the spokes of the wheel, their eyes fixed on the compass card as it floats in its bath of alcohol. He thinks of the way the spray freezes into delicate lace on the rigging, and the sound of the wind humming through the taut, tarred ropes. To be at sea in the winter is to be a guest in a world that does not acknowledge the passage of human time. It is a world of elemental forces, where the only constant is the rhythmic motion of the water and the steady, indifferent stars. The logs record the arrival of birds, the stray petrel or the weary gull that finds its way to the gallery railing, its feathers matted with salt. They stay for an hour or two, resting their heads beneath their wings, before vanishing back into the grey. Their presence is a brief, silent communion, a shared moment of rest in a landscape that offers very little. The keeper does not disturb them. He watches them through the thick glass, a silent observer of their fragile, feathered endurance. Everything in this environment is a testament to endurance. The stone of the tower, the iron of the gallery, the heavy timber of the berths, all are designed to withstand the slow, erosive power of the salt and the wind. As the night deepens, the shadows in the lighthouse seem to grow longer and softer. The transition from the middle watch to the morning watch is not a sudden event, but a gradual fading of the darkness. The black of the sky begins to soften into a deep, bruised purple, and the stars lose their sharp, crystalline brilliance. The horizon, long invisible, begins to reassert itself as a thin, dark line against the pale grey of the approaching dawn. This is the most silent hour, the time when even the wind seems to hold its breath. The sea is a vast, silver plate, reflecting the first, tentative light of the sun that remains hidden below the curve of the earth. In the ledgers of the whaling stations in the far south, the clerks would note the arrival of the icebergs, great, floating cathedrals of ancient ice that drifted past the harbor with a slow, majestic indifference. They would describe the color of the ice as a blue so deep it seemed to hold the light of 1,000 years. The bergs would groan and roll in the swell, shedding shards of glass like ice into the dark water, creating a sound like the breaking of 1,000 mirrors. To read these accounts is to be transported to a place where the scale of the world is vast and the presence of man is small and fleeting. The ice does not hurry. It moves with the currents and the tides, a slow, inevitable progression toward the warmer waters of the north. The keeper of the light understands this slow progression. His life is measured by the consumption of oil and the winding of the clockwork. There is a profound peace in this repetition. It is the peace of the tides, the peace of the seasons, the peace of a world that moves according to laws that are ancient and unchanging. He picks up the quill once more to make the final entry of his watch. The ink is dark and flows smoothly onto the page. *0600 hours. Light extinguished. Daybreak clear. One schooner sighted on the eastward horizon, heading south. He blots the entry with a sprinkle of fine, grey sand, then closes the book with a soft, muffled thud. The sound marks the end of his vigil, yet the continuity of the light remains, a silent promise kept against the darkness of the sea. The transition from the lamp's amber glow to the cold, blue light of a winter morning is a slow and delicate process. The keeper steps out onto the gallery, the iron railing cold beneath his hand. The air is sharp and tastes of salt and frozen spray. Below him, the sea is an endless expanse of moving hills, the grey water marbled with white foam where the swells break over the hidden reefs. The sound of the surf is louder here, a continuous, rolling thunder that seems to vibrate through the very foundation of the island. There is no one else in sight. The world is a solitude of water and sky, a vast, open cathedral where the only music is the wind and the waves. In the journals of the inland explorers, those who sought the Northwest Passage by sledge and foot, there is a recurring mention of the white silence. It was a condition of the atmosphere where the sky and the snow became one, and all sense of distance and direction vanished. A man could walk for hours and feel as though he had not moved at all. The only sound was the crunch of his own boots on the frozen crust and the rhythmic creak of the leather harness. It was a world stripped of all color and detail, a landscape of pure, unadulterated light. In such a place, the mind turns inward, finding a quiet rhythm in the act of breathing and the steady, repetitive motion of the march. The lighthouse keeper feels a kinship with these men. Though he is stationary, his life is also a journey through a landscape of extremes. He knows the weight of the silence that follows a great storm, the way the world seems to hold its breath as if exhausted by the violence of the wind. He knows the subtle variations in the color of the water, from the deep, bruised green of a coming gale to the pale, translucent turquoise of a calm summer morning. He has learned to read the clouds as if they were a map, identifying the towering cumulus that brings the squalls and the high, wispy cirrus that signals a change in the weather. As the sun finally crests the horizon, it does not burst forth with heat, but emerges as a pale, golden disk, casting long, shivering reflections across the surface of the sea. The light is weak and offers no warmth, yet it transforms the world into a landscape of brilliant, metallic clarity. The spray rising from the rocks becomes a cloud of diamonds, and the wet surfaces of the granite glow with a soft, inner light. This is the reward of the morning watch, to witness the rebirth of the world from the darkness, to see the first light touch the tips of the waves and turn the grey sea into a field of moving silver. The keeper descends the winding stone staircase, his boots echoing softly against the masonry. The air in the lower levels of the tower is cool and smells of damp stone and the sea. He passes the storerooms, where the barrels of oil and the crates of wick are neatly stacked, their wooden staves silvered by the salt air. He passes the coal bunker and the heavy iron door of the oil cellar, each space a testament to the logistics of survival on this remote outcrop. At the base of the tower, he enters his small living quarters. The room is modest, furnished with a narrow bunk, a sturdy wooden table, and a small bookshelf containing a few well-worn volumes of poetry and navigation charts. There is a profound sense of continuity in these objects. The table has been smoothed by the elbows of a dozen keepers before him. The bunk has held the weight of men who have long since vanished into the history of the service. The lighthouse is a vessel that does not move, a ship anchored forever to the rock, and those who serve within it are part of a long, unbroken lineage of watchers. They are the guardians of the threshold, the ones who stand between the safety of the harbor and the indifference of the deep. It is a duty that requires no fanfare, only a steady hand and a quiet mind. He begins the process of preparing his morning meal with the same unhurried deliberation that characterized his watch. He builds a small fire in the stove, the dry driftwood catching quickly and filling the room with the scent of cedar and salt. He grinds the coffee beans in a small, iron mill, the sound a rhythmic, comforting rasp in the silence. The water in the kettle begins to hum, then to whistle softly, a domestic sound that anchors him to the world of the living. As he eats, he looks out the small, thick-paned window at the sea. The schooner he sighted earlier is now a tiny speck on the horizon, its sails white against the grey water, moving slowly toward some distant port. In the harbour ledgers of the mid-19th century, such arrivals and departures were recorded with a bureaucratic stoicism. Brigantine and Mary Celeste arrived with a cargo of molasses. Sloop to windward cleared for the Grand Banks. Schooner Isabella overdue, presumed lost in the October gale. Behind these brief entries lie 1,000 stories of labour and loss, of the slow, grinding work of the sea and the quiet endurance of those who make their living upon it. The sea is a ledger of its own, a vast and fluid archive that remembers nothing and hides everything. To work upon it is to accept a life of constant negotiation with the elements, a slow dance of sail and rudder against the weight of the wind. The keeper thinks of the damp wool of his coat, hanging by the door, and the way it will never truly be dry until the spring. He thinks of the iron-stained water in the cistern and the way the sleet rattles against the glass like a handful of thrown sand. These are not hardships to him, they are the textures of his life, as familiar and necessary as the rhythm of his own heartbeat. There is a deep, quiet satisfaction in the fulfillment of a duty that is both simple and essential. The light must burn. The gears must turn. The log must be kept. In a world of constant change and shifting tides, these are the few things that remain constant. He moves to the window and watches the gulls as they wheel and dive in the wake of the receding tide. They are graceful and effortless, their cries lost in the roar of the surf. The world is fully awake now, though it is a quiet, somber awakening. The clouds have moved in, a thick, grey blanket that threatens snow, and the sea has taken on a leaden, opaque quality. The horizon is once again beginning to blur, the distinction between the water and the sky dissolving into a seamless wash of grey. It is a day for indoor tasks, for polishing the spare brass, for mending the torn netting of a lobster pot, for reading by the low light of the stove. In the logs of the expedition ships, this was the time for the winter schools, where the officers would teach the sailors to read and write, the scratch of slate pencils the only sound in the dark, cramped quarters of the lower deck. They would hold theatrical performances and lectures on navigation, anything to keep the mind engaged during the long, dark months of the polar night. It was a strategy of survival, a way of maintaining the structures of civilization in a place that seemed determined to erase them. They lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the sun to return and the ice to break, their lives measured by the slow consumption of their stores and the steady accumulation of the frost. The lighthouse keeper finds a similar solace in his books. He opens a volume of maritime charts, the paper yellowed and brittle at the edges. He traces the lines of the coast, the intricate webs of soundings and depth markers that delineate the hidden landscape of the seafloor. Each number on the chart represents a moment of measurement, a lead line dropped into the dark water to touch the sand or the rock below. It is a map of the invisible, a guide to a world that can only be known by touch and by the slow, painful process of observation. He finds a strange comfort in these charts, in the way they impose order upon the chaos of the sea. As the afternoon fades into a premature twilight, the keeper prepares to return to the tower. The cycle is beginning again. He will climb the stairs, trim the wicks, and wind the clockwork. He will light the lamp and watch as the first beam of light cuts through the gathering gloom, a golden bridge across the darkening water. The snow begins to fall then, not in a flurry, but in slow, large flakes that drift down from the grey sky like the feathers of 1,000 birds. They settle on the gallery railing and the cold stone of the tower, melting at first, then beginning to form a thin, white crust. The world becomes even quieter under the mantle of the snow. The sound of the sea is dampened, and the air becomes thick and heavy. The lighthouse stands as a solitary sentinel in the white waste, its light a steady, rhythmic pulse that defies the encroaching darkness. Inside the gallery, the keeper feels the familiar warmth of the lamps and the steady vibration of the gears. He takes his seat at the table and opens the logbook to a fresh page. The ink is ready. The nib of the pen is sharp. He waits for a moment, listening to the silence of the snow and the slow, rhythmic breathing of the sea, before he begins to write. The entries will be the same as they have always been. They will speak of the wind and the visibility, the oil consumed and the light maintained. They will be a record of a night like any other, a quiet increment in the long history of the light. And as he writes, the world outside will continue its slow, unhurried progression. The tides will turn, the ice will drift, and the great, grey cloth of the sea will fold and unfold in the darkness. There is no end to this narrative, only the steady, rhythmic repetition of the watch, a long-form chronicle of the sea and the sky, written in the quiet language of the light and the dark. In the far north, the ships remain locked in their frozen embrace, their timbers creaking softly in the cold. The sailors sleep in their wool-lined bunks, their dreams filled with the sound of running water and the scent of green grass. The aurora continues its silent dance across the stars, a pale, flickering ghost in the immense cathedral of the night. And here, in the lighthouse, the keeper watches the snow fall against the glass, a slow and steady curtain that marks the passage of the hours. The candle in the lantern is low, but the great lens above continues to turn, its light a constant, reassuring presence in a world of shadow and mist. The night is long, and the sea is vast, but within the circle of the light, there is a profound and lasting peace. The glass of the lantern room is thick, cold to the touch, and etched with the faint, swirling patterns of salt spray that have dried into a fine white crust. It is the middle watch, the hour when the world beyond the gallery railing ceases to be a place of geography and becomes instead a vast, breathing weight of shadow. Here, inside the drum of the lens, the light is a slow and rhythmic pulse, a golden heartbeat that sweeps across the whitewashed walls with a deliberate, unhurried grace. The mechanism rotates on its bed of mercury, a silent glide of heavy bronze and polished steel, making no sound but the faintest, most rhythmic hum of the clockwork weights descending deep within the hollow core of the tower. It is a steady, reassuring friction, the sound of time being measured out in inches of hemp rope and the slow turning of gears. Outside, the Arctic night is not truly black, but a deep, bruised indigo that stretches toward the horizon where the sea and the sky become a single, indistinguishable veil. The ice is moving tonight. One can hear it if the breath is held, a distant, tectonic groaning, the sound of immense white floes grinding their shoulders against one another in the dark. It is a low, resonant frequency that vibrates through the very foundation of the lighthouse, a reminder of the ancient, slow-moving power of the pack. The logs of the Hesperus recovered from the winter quarters of 1845, speak of this sound as the long sigh of the world, a noise that settles into the bones and lulls the mind into a state of heavy, dreamless observation. On the small wooden desk in the watch room, the ledger lies open. The ink is dark, drying slowly in the damp air, recording the minutiae of the night. The entries are brief, written in a hand that has grown steady through years of solitude. Wind veering north-northwest. Visibility 10 miles. Light burning clear. All well. There is a comfort in the repetition of these words, a sense of continuity that links this night to every night that has come before. The smell of the room is a familiar composition of whale oil, charred wick, and the sharp, clean scent of the cold air that leaks in through the brass vents. It is a scent that speaks of safety and duty, of a small circle of warmth maintained against the vast, encroaching chill of the northern latitudes. Below the tower, the surf pulls at the shingle beach with a slow, dragging sound, the stones rolling over one another in a rhythmic wash of cold water. Each wave is a long, deliberate thought, surfacing from the deep and spending itself against the shore before receding back into the dark. The tide is coming in, reclaiming the kelp-strewn rocks and the skeletal remains of driftwood that have bleached white under the summer sun. Now, in the autumn of the year, the wood is dark and heavy with moisture, half buried in the freezing sand. The sea does not hurry, it moves with the patience of an element that has no end, a slow rise and fall that mirrors the steady breathing of a sleeper. In the galley of the keeper's quarters, the embers in the cast iron stove glow with a dull, recessed red. A copper kettle sits on the hob, no longer whistling, but releasing a thin, translucent ribbon of steam that vanishes into the shadows of the rafters. The walls are lined with timber salvaged from a French barque that ran aground 3 decades ago, thick, salt-saturated oak that has been polished by years of lamplight and wood smoke. To run a hand over the grain is to feel the history of the vessel, the slow growth of the forest and the long voyage across the Atlantic, all resting now in the quietude of this stationary ship of stone. The expedition logs from the *Terror* and the *Erebus* often remarked upon the silence of the ice, a silence so profound it seemed to have a physical presence. It was not an absence of sound, but a layering of soft, muffled tones, the hiss of dry snow skittering across the deck, the creak of the hull as the temperature dropped, the snap of a frozen stay. Tonight, the air around the lighthouse carries that same quality of hushed anticipation. The sleet has begun to fall, fine and sharp, tapping against the glass like the ghost of a moth. It does not rattle, it merely settles, building a thin, crystalline layer that softens the glare of the lamp and turns the world into a blurred, impressionistic landscape of grey and gold. Inside the lantern, the wick is trimmed to a perfect, even square. The flame is steady, shielded by the heavy crystal prisms that bend and focus the light into a single, piercing beam. This light is a bridge across the water, a silent signal to any vessel that might be ghosting through the fog, though none are expected in this season. The shipping lanes have long since moved south, fleeing the advancing ice, leaving the lighthouse to stand watch over an empty kingdom. There is a profound peace in this isolation, a shedding of the noise and clutter of the inhabited world. Here, the only things that matter are the height of the oil in the reservoir, the tension of the clockwork spring, and the slow, inevitable turning of the earth. The wool of the keeper's coat is heavy and damp, smelling of the sea and the sheep of the high moorlands. It is a coarse, honest fabric that holds the heat close to the skin, providing a private sanctuary against the draught. One sits on the narrow stool, watching the reflection of the light in the dark curve of the glass, and the mind begins to wander down the long corridors of maritime history. One thinks of the chart rooms of old, where maps were drawn by candlelight, the coastlines traced with meticulous care by men who saw the world through the salt-stained lenses of sextants. Those maps are full of uncharted reaches and isles of birds, places where the water is deep and the bottom is composed of fine, grey silt that has not been disturbed for 1,000 years. The floor of the ocean is a place of eternal stillness, a vast plain of soft sediment where the pressure is a constant, heavy embrace. Up here, on the surface, we feel the movement of the wind and the agitation of the waves, but down there, in the crushing dark, the world is at rest. The sunken timbers of forgotten ships settle into the ooze, becoming part of the geology of the seabed. They are slowly encrusted with minerals, their iron bolts rusting away to leave only the memory of their shape in the sand. It is a slow, dignified dissolution, a returning to the elements that is as peaceful as the falling of snow. The wind has dropped now, leaving the air unnaturally still. The only sound is the drip of meltwater from the eaves of the gallery, a slow, irregular percussion that marks the passage of the hours. Each drop falls into the darkness below, shattering on the stone steps with a faint, metallic ring. The fog is beginning to roll in from the banks, a thick, white wall that swallows the stars and muffles the sound of the surf. It moves with a ghostly deliberation, flowing over the surface of the water like poured milk, filling the hollows of the rocks and rising up to meet the light. When the fog arrives, the world shrinks to the size of the gallery. The beam of the light strikes the mist and is scattered, creating a soft, luminous halo that surrounds the tower. It is like being suspended in a cloud, a state of weightless floating where the horizon is gone and the only reality is the stone beneath one's feet and the rhythmic pulse of the lamp. The fog signal, a great bronze bell or a steam-powered horn, begins its work. It is a deep, resonant lowing, a sound that carries for miles across the water, warning the invisible world of the presence of the land. It is a lonely sound, but also a comforting one, a voice calling out in the dark, asserting that here, at least, there is a fixed point, a place of stability in a shifting, nebulous sea. The logs of the 1830 survey speak of nights such as this, when the fog was so thick that the men on deck could not see the masts above them. They spoke of the way the sound of the water changed, becoming muffled and heavy, as if the ocean itself had been wrapped in wool. They spent those nights in the belly of the ship, listening to the drip of condensation from the beams and the slow, rhythmic creak of the timbers. There is a deep, primal safety in being enclosed in a sturdy vessel while the elements murmur outside. It is the safety of the cradle, of the burrow, of the stone tower rooted deep into the granite of the coast. One's thoughts turn to the stores in the cellar, the barrels of salted beef, the sacks of flour, the tins of tea and the casks of fresh water. Everything is neatly stacked, labeled in the precise, utilitarian hand of the quartermaster. These supplies are the currency of survival, the tangible evidence of foresight and preparation. They represent the quiet confidence of those who know the winter is long and that the sun will be a rare visitor in the months to come. There is a satisfaction in the order of the larder, the way the light of a hand-held lantern catches the curve of a ceramic jar or the dull shine of a tin lid. It is an architecture of necessity, beautiful in its simplicity. The clock on the wall of the watchroom has a brass pendulum that swings with a slow, hypnotic regularity. Asterisk Tark. 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 It is the heartbeat of the tower, a steady pulse that cuts through the silence and anchors the mind to the present moment. The brass is polished to a high sheen, reflecting the golden glow of the lamp in a series of shimmering, distorted arcs. To look into the brass is to see a world of soft edges and warm light, a world where time does not rush but flows like honey from a jar. It is easy to lose oneself in that reflection, to let the hours drift by in a state of quiet contemplation. The ice continues its slow migration. Far out in the channel, a berg as large as a cathedral drifts silently toward the south. It is a magnificent, ancient thing, carved by the wind and the waves into a palace of translucent blue and brilliant white. It carries with it the cold of 1,000 winters, a frozen memory of the high Arctic. It moves without haste, driven by deep-sea currents that have been flowing since the world was young. As it passes, it leaves a trail of smaller fragments, growlers, and beargary bits that bob in the water like the debris of a shattered moon. They are beautiful and dangerous, but from the height of the lantern room, they are merely points of interest in a vast, unfolding drama of ice and water. The wick of the lamp requires a slight adjustment. With practiced movements, the keeper turns the small brass wheel, watching as the flame responds, growing taller and steadier. The heat from the lamp is a gentle presence, warming the air in the small room and keeping the frost from the inside of the glass. It is a delicate balance, this maintenance of the light. Too much oil and the wick will smoke, too little and the light will dim. It requires a steady hand and a patient eye, a willingness to attend to the smallest details in the service of the greater purpose. The Journal of a Lighthouse Guard in the 1870s describes the sensation of the long watch, the way the mind begins to peel away the layers of the mundane until only the essential truths remain. He wrote of the way the stars seemed to descend toward the tower on clear nights, so close that one could almost hear the cold, crystalline music of their spheres. He wrote of the way the sea became a mirror, reflecting the vastness of the heavens until the tower seemed to be floating in the very center of the universe. It is a feeling of profound insignificance, but also of profound connection. To be the keeper of the light is to be a small but necessary part of the celestial order. The sleet has turned to snow, the flakes large and wet, clinging to the ironwork of the gallery and the edges of the window frames. They fall silently, a white curtain that further softens the world. The sound of the surf is now a distant, muffled thrum, as if the ocean has been covered in a thick, downy blanket. The lighthouse stands as a dark pillar in a white world, its golden beam a warm promise in the cold. Inside, the scent of the oil lamp and the dry warmth of the watchroom create a sanctuary of peace. The ledger is nearly full, its pages a record of a year of quiet duty, of storms faced and nights kept, of the steady, unwavering commitment to the safety of those at sea. In the 1818 expedition logs, there is a description of the northern lights as seen from the deck of a ship frozen in the pack. The officer wrote of curtains of green and violet light that danced across the sky, shifting and shimmering like silk in a breeze. He described the way the light was reflected in the ice, turning the frozen waste into a garden of emerald and amethyst. Tonight, behind the veil of snow, one can imagine that same light playing above the clouds, a silent, celestial firework display that requires no audience to be magnificent. It is enough to know that it is there, a part of the hidden beauty of the Arctic night. The weights of the clockwork mechanism have reached the bottom of their descent. It is time to wind them again. The crank is heavy, made of solid iron, and it fits into the socket with a satisfying click. The winding is a slow, rhythmic process, a physical exertion that grounds the keeper in the reality of the machine. Asterisk crank. Click. Crank. Click. Asterisk. The weights rise slowly, inch by inch, storing the energy that will keep the lens turning for the remainder of the watch. It is a simple, honest task, a ritual that has been performed thousands of times in this tower and in hundreds of others like it along the rugged coasts of the north. Once the winding is complete, the stillness returns, deeper than before. The snow is piling up on the gallery floor, a pristine, untouched drift that sparkles in the stray light from the lens. The world is being erased, one layer of white at a time, leaving only the tower and the light. There is a sense of being at the end of the world, or perhaps at the beginning of a new one, where everything is clean and quiet and full of possibility. The mind drifts toward sleep, not with a sudden drop, but with a slow, drifting descent, like a leaf falling through the still air of an autumn forest. The bed in the quarters below is narrow and firm, covered with heavy wool blankets that have the scent of cedar and old wood. The pillow is stuffed with down, a soft, yielding support for a head filled with the images of the night. To lie there, listening to the muffled pulse of the light and the distant, rhythmic lowing of the foghorn, is to be enveloped in a sense of total security. The tower is strong, the light is burning, and the world is at peace. The ice will continue its slow journey, the tide will come and go, and the stars will wheel across the sky, all in their own time, without need for hurry or alarm. In the old ledgers of the harbor masters, one can find the names of ships that have long since passed into legend. The asterisk Arctic Queen asterisk, the asterisk Northern Star asterisk, the asterisk Seafoam Star. They were vessels of wood and canvas, driven by the wind and the men who understood its whims. Their voyages are recorded in neat columns of copperplate script, the dates of departure, the nature of the cargo, the names of the captains. There is a quiet dignity in these records, a testament to the long history of human endeavor on the high seas. They remind us that we are part of a long line of watchers and travelers, each of us playing our small part in the great, unfolding story of the maritime world. The brass lamp on the nightstand is turned low, its flame a tiny, golden point that casts long, flickering shadows across the room. The wood of the wall seems to breathe, expanding and contracting with the subtle shifts in temperature. It is a living thing, this tower, a companion in the long watches of the night. One closes one's eyes, and the image of the rotating lens remains, a fading afterimage of gold against a background of deep blue. The rhythm of the light becomes the rhythm of the breath, slow, steady, and certain. The 1852 journals of a ship's surgeon describe the sweetness of the dark, the way the absence of the sun allows the other senses to awaken. He spoke of the smell of the sea ice, which is different from the smell of the open water, crisper, more metallic, like the scent of a whetstone. He spoke of the sound of the wind in the rigging, which he likened to a choir of distant voices singing in a language that predates human speech. To lie in the dark and listen to the world is to participate in a conversation that has been going on for eons. It is a conversation about the movement of the tides, the migration of the whales, and the slow, inevitable cooling of the earth. The lighthouse is a monument to this conversation, a fixed point in a world of constant flux. It stands on its rock, unmoving, while the sea batters its base and the wind howls around its lantern. It is a symbol of endurance, of the quiet strength that comes from having a clear purpose and a steady heart. As the keeper drifts into sleep, the lighthouse continues its work, its beam sweeping across the water with the same unhurried grace it has shown for decades. It does not tire, it does not waver. It simply is. The snow has stopped now, and the clouds are beginning to thin. A single star, bright and cold, appears through a rift in the white veil. It is the North Star, the ancient guide of mariners, the one fixed point in the celestial sphere. It hangs there, a silent companion to the lighthouse, its light traveling across the vast reaches of space to touch the glass of the lantern room. There is a profound symmetry in this, the small, man-made light and the great, distant star, both doing their work in the dark, providing a sense of direction and a promise of home. The dreams that come in the lighthouse are dreams of the sea. They are not dreams of storms or shipwrecks, but of the vast, open reaches of the ocean, of the slow swell of the waves and the endless horizon. They are dreams of the deep, where the light of the sun never reaches and the water is as still as the air in a cathedral. In these dreams, one is a part of the water, moving with the currents, flowing around the continents, rising and falling with the breath of the world. It is a state of total immersion, of being lost and found at the same time. In the morning, the world will be different. The snow will have transformed the landscape, smoothing out the jagged edges of the rocks and covering the beach in a thick, white mantle. The light of the sun, when it finally appears, will be pale and watery, casting long, blue shadows across the ice. The keeper will rise and descend the spiral stairs, his boots echoing on the stone, to begin the tasks of the day, cleaning the glass, trimming the wick, recording the events of the night in the ledger. But for now, there is only the dark, the warmth of the blankets, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of the light. The expedition notes of 1875 record a curious phenomenon, that singing of the ice. On very cold nights, when the temperature drops rapidly, the ice can crack with a sound like a pistol shot, a sharp, echoing report that carries for miles. But there is also a softer sound, a high-pitched humming caused by the wind vibrating across the edges of the floes. It is a haunting, ethereal music, the sound of the Arctic itself. Tonight, the ice is quiet, its song reduced to a low, vibratory hum that is felt rather than heard. It is the sound of the world at rest, a lullaby for the frozen north. The copper kettle on the stove has cooled, its steam long since vanished. The galley is in shadow, the only light the faint, red glow of the dying embers. Everything is in its place, the tin plates, the heavy mugs, the polished silver. There is a sense of order and peace that permeates every corner of the tower, a domesticity that is made all the more precious by the wildness of the world outside. It is a small, well-tended garden of civilization in the midst of a vast, indifferent wilderness. One's breath slows, matching the rhythm of the clockwork waits. The heaviness of sleep is a physical weight, a warm, soft blanket that settles over the mind and the body. The thoughts of the night, the ice, the light, the history of the sea, begin to blur and merge, becoming a single, indistinct tapestry of experience. The boundaries between the self and the world begin to dissolve, leaving only the sensation of existing in a state of perfect, unhurried peace. The final entry in the log for this watch would be a simple one. * light burning bright. Sea calm. All is well. It is the ultimate statement of the keeper's art, the distillation of hours of observation and care into a few, steady words. They are words that have been written in thousands of logs, by thousands of hands, across the centuries. They are a bridge between the past and the present, a testament to the enduring nature of the human spirit. As the lens continues its slow, majestic rotation, the golden beam sweeps one last time across the room, illuminating the dust motes that dance in the air like tiny, golden stars. Then it moves on, out across the water, reaching toward the horizon, a silent, unwavering messenger in the night. The lighthouse remains, a pillar of stone and light, watching over the sleeping world with the patience of the ages. And in the quiet of the tower, in the warmth of the blankets, the keeper finally sleeps, cradled in the rhythmic, breathing silence of the Arctic night. The old harbor ledgers often noted the arrival of the winter birds, the hardy species that stayed behind when the others flew south. Their cries are sharp and lonely, echoing across the frozen harbors. But tonight, even the birds are silent, huddled in the crevices of the cliffs, their heads tucked beneath their wings. The world has withdrawn into itself, seeking shelter from the cold, waiting for the slow return of the sun. It is a time of waiting, of quiet endurance, of the deep, restorative sleep that comes when the work is done and the light is secure. The timbers of the tower, the oak and the granite, the brass and the glass, all seem to settle into the earth, their weight a solid, reassuring presence. They have stood for 100 years, and they will stand for 100 more, a part of the permanent landscape of the coast. They are the bones of the world, strong and unyielding, providing a foundation for the fragile, flickering life that they protect. To be within their embrace is to be part of something timeless and vast, a history that stretches back to the first fires lit on the first shores. The silence is absolute now, a thick, velvety blanket that covers everything. The pulse of the light is no longer a sound or a sight, but a feeling, a gentle vibration in the air that marks the passage of the seconds. The mind lets go of its last hold on the world, drifting off into the deep, dark waters of dreamless sleep. The ice moves, the tide turns, and the lighthouse stands, a sentinel of the night, its golden heart beating steadily in the cold, Arctic dark. All is quiet. All is still. All is well. The hour is now deeply advanced into the middle watch, that suspended interval where the rotation of the Earth seems to slow against the pressurized weight of the polar night. Here, within the salt-bleached timber walls of the station, the air carries the faint, persistent scent of whale oil, cold iron, and the slow crystallization of sea spray against the outer stone. There is no wind to speak of, Only the atmospheric pressure of the stillness, a silence so profound it possesses its own low, resonant frequency, like a thumb pressed gently against the rim of a crystal glass. The wick in the secondary lamp flickers once, a soft, amber pulse that casts long, unhurried shadows across the charts spread upon the oak trestle table, for charts where the coastlines are rendered in delicate, uncertain ink, fading into the great white voids of the unexplored north. You are seated by the small iron stove, where the coals glow with a muted, rhythmic intensity, breathing in and out with the draft of the flue. The warmth is localized, a small circle of comfort against the vast, encroaching frigidness of the Arctic exterior. On the table lies the logbook for the year 1874, its vellum pages heavy with the humidity of the sea, the edges curled slightly from years of exposure to the damp air of the high latitudes. The handwriting within is precise, a testament to the discipline of men who found solace in the steady application of ink to paper while the world outside vanished into a blur of sleet and whiteout. You turn a page, the sound of the paper muted and soft, like the rustle of dry kelp on a winter beach. The entry dated the 14th of November begins with a notation on the barometer, which has remained steady and low, pinned at a reading that suggests a long, unchanging period of heavy air. The writer, a second mate of some long-forgotten expedition, notes that the ice has finally closed around the hull of the vessel, not with a crash, but with a slow, agonizing groan of timber against floe, a sound he describes as being like the settling of an old house in the dead of winter. He writes of the way the ship now sits perfectly level, cradled by the frozen sea, her mast silhouetted against a sky that never truly brightens, but merely shifts from a deep, bruised indigo to a pale, translucent violet at the noon hour. There is a sense of immense patience in his words, a recognition that for the next 6 months, the ship is no longer a vessel of motion, but a stationary dwelling, a wooden island held fast in a desert of white. One can almost feel the texture of the life he describes, the daily ritual of clearing the frost from the skylights with a copper scraper, the sound of the blades rhythmic and percussive against the thick glass. He speaks of the men's breath as it rises in plumes toward the low ceilings of the mess deck, and the way the condensation trickles down the iron bolts, freezing into small, clear beads of ice by morning. Everything is slow. Everything is deliberate. To move too quickly is to invite the cold into the lungs, and so they move with a measured, underwater grace, wrapped in layers of heavy navy wool and seal hide, their boots making a soft, crunching percussion upon the snow-covered decks. Outside the station, the lighthouse lens continues its slow, hypnotic rotation. It is a massive assembly of polished glass and brass, floating in a bath of mercury to ensure a frictionless turn. The mechanism is wound by a system of weights that descend slowly through the center of the tower, a steady, rhythmic ticking that serves as the heartbeat of the structure. Up in the lantern room, the light is a warm, golden presence, a concentrated beam that cuts through the freezing mist, reaching out miles across the dark, undulating surface of the water where the ice has not yet taken hold. The light does not flicker, it sweeps, a constant, reassuring arc that marks the passage of time in increments of 10 seconds. To watch it from below is to be lulled by the predictability of it, the way the shadows of the gallery railings pass over the snowy ground in a never-ending circle. In the log, the mate describes the arrival of the deep frost, the kind that turns the sea mist into rime that coats every rope and shroud until the ship looks like a ghost of itself, draped in fine, crystalline lace. He notes how the salt becomes a crust upon the railings, and how the dogs, huddling together in their wooden kennels on the ice, become small mounds of white, their breathing the only sign of life in the frozen yard. There is a strange, quiet beauty in this isolation. He writes of the aurora, not as a dramatic display, but as a subtle shifting of the light, a pale green wash that reflects off the hummocks of ice, making the landscape appear as though it were glowing from beneath the surface. It is a light that provides no warmth, only a sense of the immense, indifferent scale of the natural world. The narrative shifts slightly as you turn another page, moving to the records of the shore station, where the duties are more terrestrial but no less rhythmic. Here, the entries focus on the maintenance of the oil reserves and the trimming of wicks. There is a ledger dedicated entirely to the consumption of fuel, a long list of figures written in a steady, sloping hand. The smell of the oil is thick here, a heavy, vegetal scent that seems to coat the back of the throat, grounding the senses in the material reality of the work. You can imagine the keeper moving with a small hand lantern through the lower storage vaults where the great iron drums are kept, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the stone walls, muffled by the thickness of the frost-coated masonry. He records the tides with a devotion that borders on the religious. Every 6 hours, he walks down to the tide gauge, a wooden slipway marked with brass increments that has been worn smooth by the ceaseless action of the water. He notes the height of the swell, the drift of the kelp, and the color of the water, sometimes a slate gray, sometimes a deep, impenetrable black. He describes the way the tide brings in treasures from the deep, bits of driftwood polished to a silver sheen, the translucent shells of sea snails, and occasionally, the heavy, rusted links of a chain lost by some ship a century prior. These items are collected and placed upon the windowsill of the station, a small museum of the sea's slow, rhythmic breathing. The silence of the middle watch is occasionally punctuated by the settling of the building itself, a soft creak of timber or the metallic contraction of the stovepipe as it cools. These sounds are not startling, they are the familiar vocabulary of a structure under the pressure of the cold. They remind you of the solidity of your surroundings, the way the thick walls are designed to withstand the relentless push of the polar gales. You lean back in the chair, the wool of your sweater heavy and warm, the faint sound of the distant surf beginning to filter through the stone. It is a low, rolling sound, more a vibration than a noise, the sound of the Atlantic or the Arctic Ocean grinding against the foundational rock of the world. In the logbook, the mate begins to describe the interior life of the frozen ship during the midwinter months. He speaks of the library, a small collection of leather-bound volumes that have been read and reread until the covers are soft and the pages are stained with tea and tobacco. He describes the men sitting in the dim light of the lamps, mending their clothes with thick bone needles, the rhythmic pull of the thread through the canvas making a faint, zipping sound in the quiet room. There is a sense of communal stillness, a shared understanding that survival depends upon this quietude, upon the conservation of energy and the maintenance of a calm, steady spirit. They play games of chess with pieces carved from walrus ivory, the clack of the pieces on the board the only interruption to the low murmur of conversation. The prose in the ledger is dry, focusing on the factual, the temperature, the wind direction, the amount of coal remaining in the bunkers, but between the lines, there is a profound sense of the atmosphere. He mentions the way the frost patterns on the glass resemble the ferns of a tropical forest, a strange irony in a place where no green thing grows. He writes of the sound of the ice cracking in the distance, a sharp, gunshot report that echoes across the frozen expanse, signaling the shifting of the great tectonic plates of the sea. These sounds are part of the landscape, as natural and expected as the rising of the moon. As you read, the light from your own lamp seems to soften, the edges of the room blurring into a gentle, indistinct haze. The rhythmic ticking of the lighthouse clockwork becomes a metronome for your own breathing, a slow, steady pulse that aligns with the ancient, unhurried pace of the chronicles. You find yourself imagining the long, dark corridors of the ship, the way the hammocks sway almost imperceptibly with the slight, frozen tremors of the hull. The smell of damp wool and old paper is a comfort, a sensory anchor in the vast, cold emptiness of the Arctic night. The keeper of the shore station makes a final entry for the month of December, noting that the sun has not been seen for 40 days. He does not write of this with despair, but with a quiet, observational tone. He speaks of the stars instead, of the way they seem larger and more brilliant in the thin, frigid air, casting enough light upon the snow to allow him to walk without a lantern. He describes the constellations as old friends, their positions in the sky marking the slow progress of the winter toward the eventual, distant spring. There is a deep peace in this acceptance of the dark, a recognition that the night is not a void, but a presence, a heavy, velvet blanket that covers the world and allows it to rest. The logs transition into a series of technical observations regarding the salinity of the ice and the thickness of the floes. These details, though dry, possess a soothing quality in their meticulousness. To measure the world so precisely is to exert a form of gentle control over the chaos of the elements. The keeper records the exact weight of the snow cleared from the gallery, the number of gallons of oil transferred from the storage tanks to the lantern room, and the condition of the brass fittings after a week of salt mist. Each entry is a testament to the endurance of the human spirit in the face of the monumental, a steady, quiet persistence that mirrors the slow, grinding movement of the glacier themselves. You turn the page again, and the paper feels cool against your fingertips. The handwriting has become smaller, more cramped, as if the writer were trying to conserve space or perhaps warmth. He speaks of the way the silence seems to thicken as the temperature drops, how the very sound of a voice seems to be absorbed by the frost before it can travel more than a few feet. He describes the beauty of the frost smoke rising from the leads of open water, a ghostly, ethereal mist that dances in the moonlight before vanishing into the dark. It is a world of monochrome, of whites and greys and blacks, where the only color is the faint, warm glow of the ship's lamps reflecting off the ice. The narrative of the lighthouse keeper returns to the rhythm of the tides. He notes a particularly high tide that brought the water up to the very base of the tower, the waves washing over the lower steps in a rhythmic, foaming surge. He describes the sound of the water retreating, the rattle of the pebbles as they are pulled back into the depths, a sound like 1,000 small glass marbles rolling across a wooden floor. This sound, he writes, is the music of the station, a constant accompaniment to his solitary duties. It is a sound that speaks of the immense power of the sea, yet it is also deeply restful, a reminder of the eternal cycle of the Earth's waters. In the station, the air remains still. The stove has reached a state of equilibrium, the heat radiating in soft, invisible waves that shimmer slightly in the lamplight. You find your thoughts drifting, moving like the slow, heavy currents beneath the ice. The images from the logs, the frost-covered rigging, the glowing lighthouse lens, the steady hand of the mate as he writes by candlelight, all merge into a single, continuous tapestry of maritime life. It is a life defined by the horizon, by the movement of the stars, and by the slow, inevitable passage of the seasons. There is no urgency here, no need for haste. The ice will melt when it is time, the sun will return in its own season, and until then, the world is content to remain in this state of suspended, frozen grace. The lighthouse keeper's journal ends for the season with a simple observation: the light remains burning. The watch continues. These words, written in a steady, fading ink, carry a sense of profound duty and quiet satisfaction. They are the words of a man who understands his place in the world, who finds meaning in the simple act of maintaining a flame against the darkness. As you close the logbook, the sound of the cover meeting the pages is a soft, final thud, a gentle conclusion to the evening's reading. The station around you is a sanctuary of shadow and warmth. The distant sound of the sea continues its low, rhythmic pulsing, a heartbeat that echoes through the stone foundations and into the very air you breathe. The light from the lighthouse continues its slow, hypnotic sweep, a golden brushstroke across the canvas of the night. You lean back, your eyes closing as the weight of the blankets and the steady, unhurried atmosphere of the Chronicles pull you deeper into a state of profound relaxation. The Arctic night is vast, the ice is thick, and the world is asleep beneath a canopy of stars that have watched over the seas for eons. The sensation of the cold outside only serves to deepen the warmth within. You can imagine the heavy, wooden doors of the station, bolted against the frost, the iron latches cold to the touch but holding firm. You can feel the solidity of the stone walls, 3 feet thick and weathered by a century of storms, standing as a silent sentinel in the dark. The world outside is a realm of wind and ice, but here, in the heart of the station, there is only the soft glow of the embers and the slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock. In the imagination, the ship remains held fast in the flow, her masts creaking slightly in a phantom breeze. The men are asleep in their hammocks, their breathing synchronized with the slow heaving of the ice beneath the hull. The white expanse of the Arctic stretches out in every direction, a silent, undulating desert that reflects the pale light of the moon. There is no movement on the horizon, no sound but the occasional groan of the pressure ridges and the soft, sibilant whisper of the snow drifting against the side of the ship. It is a scene of absolute stillness, a moment frozen in time, preserved in the pages of the logbook and the quiet memory of the sea. The lighthouse continues its duty, the great lens turning with a precision that defies the chaos of the elements. The mercury bath is still, the weights descend with glacial slowness, and the light reaches out, a steady, unwavering beam that marks the boundary between the known and the unknown. In the lantern room, the air is warm and smells of heated glass and brass polish, a clean, industrial scent that speaks of order and care. The keeper has long since finished his rounds, his footsteps a fading echo in the spiral staircase, leaving the light to its solitary, rhythmic dance. The tide is now at its lowest point, exposing the dark, glistening ribs of the earth. The sea has retreated, leaving behind a landscape of tidal pools and salt-crusted rocks, all silent under the watchful eye of the stars. The air is so cold now that the very moisture in the atmosphere has turned to a fine, shimmering dust that hangs in the air like ground diamonds. It is a world of exquisite, fragile beauty, a world that demands nothing but your presence and your quiet observation. As the middle watch draws toward its conclusion, the darkness feels less like a void and more like a companion. It is the darkness of the deep ocean, the darkness of the long polar night, a space where time loses its linear grip and becomes a series of overlapping rhythms, the pulse of the tide, the sweep of the light, the steady breath of the sleeper. In this space, there is no worry, no tension, only the slow, heavy weight of the blankets and the gentle, rhythmic hum of the frozen world. The stove has faded to a soft, deep red, the heat now a mellow, lingering presence that wraps around you like a heavy coat. The shadows in the room have softened, their edges melding into the grey-black of the walls. The logbook on the table is a dark rectangle in the dim light, its stories of ice and endurance now subsumed into the quiet atmosphere of the room. The silence is complete, a total immersion in the stillness of the high latitudes, where the only thing that moves is the light, and the only thing that matters is the steady, unhurried passage of the hours. You are drifting now, the boundary between the station and the Chronicles blurring into a single, peaceful continuity. The sound of the surf is a distant lullaby, the ticking of the clock a heartbeat, and the cold, salt-scented air a reminder of the vast, beautiful wilderness that surrounds this small island of warmth. The ice is steady. The light is burning. The watch is held. There is nothing left to do but surrender to the rhythm of the night, to the slow, maritime pulse of a world at rest. The vision of the northern ship fades into a soft, white haze, the masts dissolving into the mist, the sound of the timber creaking becoming the sound of your own slow, steady breathing. The lighthouse tower remains, a silent pillar of strength in the dark, its light a constant, reassuring presence that guides you toward the deep, dreamless sleep of the sea. The salt on the window pane, the smell of the oil, the weight of the heavy wool, all of it becomes a part of the stillness, a part of the long, unhurried chronicle of the Arctic night. Beneath the ice, the currents move with a slow, majestic power, carrying the cold water of the poles toward the warmer reaches of the south. This movement is silent, invisible, yet it is the engine of the world, a constant, rhythmic flow that mirrors the circulation of the blood. In the station, you are part of this flow, a small, warm point of consciousness in a vast, moving system of water and wind and light. The sense of being cradled by the earth is profound, a deep, foundational security that allows every muscle to relax, every thought to dissipate like frost smoke in the wind. The final entry in the mind's log is not written in ink, but in the slow, rhythmic fading of the senses. It is a notation of peace, a record of a night well spent in the company of the old stories and the steady, enduring presence of the maritime world. The stars are bright, the ice is firm, and the light continues its slow, hypnotic rotation, marking the time in a world where time has no meaning but the next sweep of the beam, the next rise of the tide, and the long, beautiful continuity of the sleep that follows. The lamp oil is measured in the ledger with a steady hand, the quill scratching softly against the heavy vellum as the light of the afternoon begins its long, slow retreat into the grey. Here, at the edge of the world's awareness, the passage of time is not marked by the ticking of a clock, but by the gradual accumulation of salt upon the glass and the rhythmic, unhurried pulse of the tide against the granite base of the tower. It is the 4th of November, according to the log, though the seasons in these latitudes often bleed into one another, a long continuum of mist and iron-colored water. The wick is trimmed with precision, the charred remnants falling silently into a brass tray, and the smell of the whale oil is thick and comforting, a scent of ancient depths and steady, reliable warmth. Outside, the wind is a low, persistent hum, a sound so constant that it has become a form of silence, a backdrop against which the small noises of the lighthouse, the creak of a floorboard, the clink of a measuring tin, the soft sigh of the vent, take on a quiet, rhythmic importance. To look out from the gallery is to see the North Atlantic in its most contemplative state, a vast expanse of slate and charcoal waves that rise and fall with a heavy, deliberate grace. There is no urgency in the water today, only a slow, rolling momentum that carries the eye toward the horizon, where the sea and the sky are joined in a seamless, hazy scene. The air is damp with the spray of the surf, a fine, cool mist that settles on the wool of one's coat and turns the rough stone of the parapet to a darker shade of grey. In the logbook, the entry for the morning watch is brief, light southeasterly breeze, visibility moderate, 3 gulls sighted on the lee ledge. It is a record of small things, for in the solitude of the station, the small things are the anchors of the day. The brass of the Fresnel lens has been polished until it glows with a soft, buttery light, reflecting the dimming world outside in 1,000 tiny, distorted facets, a cathedral of glass designed to hold the dark at bay. Far to the north, beyond the reach of this light, the timber ships of the Arctic expedition are settling into their winter berths, the ice closing around their hulls with a sound like the grinding of distant millstones. They are silent cathedrals of oak and pine, their masts stripped of sail and standing like skeletal fingers against the pale, bruised sky. In the captain's cabin of the HMS Intrepid, The temperature is kept just high enough to prevent the ink from freezing, and the journals are filled with the patient observations of men who have learned the deep, slow rhythm of the ice. There is a mention of the way the frost patterns climb the interior bulkheads, delicate and crystalline, mimicking the shapes of ferns and forests left far behind. The smell of the ship is a mixture of damp hemp, old tea leaves, and the lingering scent of wood smoke from the galley stove, a domestic interiority that contrasts with the infinite, frozen emptiness outside the hull. The ice does not arrive all at once. It is a gradual encroachment, a thickening of the water until the waves no longer break but slide against one another with a dry, rustling sound. It begins as grease ice, a thin, oily film that dampens the swell, before hardening into pancake flows that nudge against the copper-sheathed bow with a gentle, persistent thud. On deck, the watchman moves with deliberate slowness, his boots crunching on the rime that covers the planks, his breath a white plume that lingers in the still, cold air. The rigging is encased in a translucent sheath of glaze, every rope and stay thickened by the frozen breath of the sea, turning the ship into an instrument of glass that chimes softly whenever the hull shifts in its cradle. It is a quiet world, a world of muted tones and softened edges, where the only movement is the slow drift of the pack and the occasional, distant crack of a pressure ridge forming miles away in the dark. Back in the lighthouse, the evening routine begins with the lighting of the lamp. It is a ritual of patience, the strike of the match muffled by the heavy atmosphere of the lantern room. The flame catches, a small, blue-hearted bloom that slowly expands as the oil climbs the wick, bathing the room in a warm, amber glow that pushes back the gathering shadows. The mechanism of the clockwork, cleaned and oiled with a feather's touch, begins its slow, rhythmic rotation. The weights descend through the hollow center of the tower with a sound like a deep, mechanical heartbeat, a steady thump-thump that can be felt through the soles of one's feet. It is a comforting vibration, a reminder that the light is turning, sweeping its long, pale arm across the dark water, a silent signal to any vessel that might be ghosting through the mist far below. The ledger rests on the desk in the living quarters, its pages slightly curled from the humidity that rises from the sea. One reads of the supplies brought by the tender 3 months ago, barrels of flour, tins of dried beef, crates of hardtack, and the precious jars of marmalade that are rationed for the Sundays of midwinter. The inventory is a poem of survival, a list of materials intended to sustain life in a place where the elements are indifferent to it. The copper kettle on the stove begins to simmer, a low, whistling sound that joins the chorus of the wind in the chimney. The interior of the tower is a sanctuary of order and cleanliness, the whitewashed walls reflecting the soft lamplight, the floor scrubbed with sand and seawater until the grain of the wood is smooth and pale. Here, the chaos of the ocean is filtered through the thick glass of the windows, reduced to a visual spectacle that does not disturb the stillness of the room. In the Arctic logs, the entries for December speak of the Great Dark, the time when the sun fails to rise above the horizon and the world is defined by the stars and the aurora. The men find solace in the repetition of their duties, the daily measurement of the ice thickness, the clearing of snow from the hatches, the mending of wool socks by the light of a single tallow candle. There is a profound sense of camaraderie in the shared silence, a collective understanding that they are guests in a landscape that does not belong to them. They speak of the way the moonlight reflects off the pressure ridges, casting long, indigo shadows that stretch across the floes like the fingers of a giant. The stillness is so absolute that one can hear the blood pulsing in one's ears, a rhythmic reminder of the life that persists beneath the frozen surface of the world. The lighthouse keeper sits by the stove, the warmth seeping into his bones as he listens to the tide turn. The water is receding now, exposing the wet, black rocks of the reef, the kelp trailing in the shallows like the hair of some submerged creature. The sound of the surf changes, becoming a hollower, more echoing boom as it strikes the undercut ledges. In the log, he notes the barometric pressure, the steady needle pointing to a period of calm. He thinks of the ships that have passed this way, the schooners and barques that have leaned into the wind, their sails white against the grey, and he feels a quiet kinship with the mariners who rely on his light. We are all, he reflects, navigating by the same stars, seeking the same harbour in the end. The oil in the lamp is steady, a golden pool that feeds the flame through the long hours of the night. There is a peculiar beauty in the mathematics of the light, the angles of the glass, the rotation of the gears, the precise intervals of the flash. It is a triumph of reason over the vast, unreasoning sea. The keeper takes a sip of tea, the liquid hot and dark, tasting of wood smoke and distant ports. He looks at the charts spread out on the table, the intricate lines of the coast, the soundings marked in fathoms, the names of capes and bays that sound like a litany of old memories. The map is a ghost of the land, a two-dimensional representation of a world that is constantly shifting, eroding, and rebuilding itself with every wave. In the frozen reaches, the ships are now part of the ice itself, their hulls fused into the flow, their anchors unnecessary in a world that has ceased to move. The sailors have built walls of snow around the decks to insulate the cabins, turning the vessels into white mounds that disappear into the landscape. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of damp wool and the steam from the soup copper. They read by the light of oil lamps, the words of old poets and explorers providing a bridge to the temperate world they left behind. The logs record the temperature with a clinical detachment, 30 below, 40 below, but the descriptions of the light remain poetic. They speak of the sky turning a deep, bruised violet at noon, and the way the stars seem to hang lower in the sky, brilliant and cold as diamonds set in velvet. The rhythm of the lighthouse is a slow, circular dance. Every hour, the keeper ascends the spiral stairs, his hand sliding along the cold iron rail, to check the lamp and the clockwork. The air in the stairwell is cool and smells of stone and salt. At the top, the lantern room is a cage of light suspended in the darkness. He looks out, seeing nothing but the reflection of the lens in the glass, until his eyes adjust and he can discern the white foam of the breakers on the outer reef. The world is reduced to these two things, the light and the dark, the seen and the unseen. He feels the immense weight of the tower beneath him, a solid pillar of granite rooted in the bedrock of the earth, holding its ground against the unending pressure of the Atlantic. The logs of the Arctic expedition recount the sightings of various wonders, the pale, ghostly shape of a polar bear moving across the ice with effortless grace, the shimmering curtains of the northern lights that dance in shades of green and rose, the way the sound of a human voice can carry for miles in the thin, frozen air. These things are recorded with the same meticulous detail as the consumption of coal or the health of the crew. It is a way of domesticating the sublime, of bringing the infinite within the margins of a ledger. The writing is steady, the curves of the letters elegant even when the hand that formed them was numb with cold. It is a testament to the persistence of the human spirit, the need to document, to witness, and to remember. As the night deepens, the lighthouse keeper returns to his chair, the fire in the stove now a bed of glowing coals. He thinks of the tide, how it is even now beginning its slow return, the water creeping back over the rocks, filling the tide pools, lifting the kelp. It is a constant, unceasing movement, a clock that never runs down. He finds a sense of peace in this inevitability, in the knowledge that the sun will eventually rise, the ice will eventually melt, and the light will continue to turn. The journal lies open on his lap, the blank page waiting for the morning entry. He will write of the wind, the sea state, and the amount of oil consumed. He will write of the silence, though he has no words that can truly capture its depth. The Arctic ships stir slightly in their sleep as the tide moves the ice. A timber groans, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates through the hull, a reminder that the ship is a living thing, built of wood that once grew in a sunlit forest. The men in their hammocks do not wake, they are used to the voices of the ship, the small sighs and creaks that are the language of the vessel. They dream of green fields and the smell of warm earth, of the sound of rain on a thatched roof, and the feeling of a sun that has actual warmth. But for now, they are held in the blue, icy grip of the north, part of a landscape that is both beautiful and terrible in its stillness. The lamp in the tower flickers slightly as a gust of wind finds a seam in the glass, then steadies itself, its amber glow unwavering. The keeper watches the shadow of the lens rotate across the wall, a slow, rhythmic movement that is almost hypnotic. He feels a sense of deep contentment in his solitude, a realization that he is a small but essential part of a vast, interconnected system of safety and guidance. He is the watcher on the threshold, the guardian of the light. The smell of the sea is everywhere, a sharp, bracing scent that clears the mind and settles the soul. He closes his eyes for a moment, listening to the heartbeat of the tower, the pulse of the tide, and the long, slow breath of the wind. In the ledger of the expedition, the final entry for the day is a simple observation: the stars are very bright tonight. It is a sentence that contains a world of meaning, a recognition of the beauty that persists even in the harshest of environments. The ink dries slowly in the cool air, the black lines standing out against the pale paper like the tracks of a bird on fresh snow. The book is closed, the quill placed in its stand, and the cabin is left to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the men and the occasional, distant crack of the ice. The ship is a small pod of warmth in a frozen sea, a vessel of hope drifting in a white wilderness. The lighthouse stands firm as the first hint of dawn begins to pale the eastern horizon. The grey of the sea becomes a lighter shade, the foam of the breakers more distinct against the dark rocks. The keeper prepares for the morning watch, the extinguishment of the lamp, and the cleaning of the glass. The cycle begins anew, a continuation of a story that has no end, only a series of steady, rhythmic chapters. The oil is measured, the wick is trimmed, and the logbook is signed with a steady hand. The world wakes slowly, a gradual transition from shadow to light, as the great, grey Atlantic continues its patient, unhurried roll toward the shore. The ships in the north will remain in their icy embrace for many months more, but they are prepared, their hulls strong, their crews resilient. They are part of the history of the ice, a chapter in the long, cold narrative of exploration. And here, at the lighthouse, the stone walls are a testament to the endurance of those who watch the sea, who record the movements of the tides and the passage of the clouds. The air is still damp, the wool of the keeper's coat still heavy with the mist, but the fire in the stove is warm, and the light, though now extinguished for the day, remains ready, a silent promise held in a cathedral of glass and brass. The ledger is placed back on the shelf, its spine worn and familiar. It is a record of a life lived in harmony with the elements, a life of quiet duty and steady observation. As the sun finally breaks through the layer of clouds, casting a cold, gold light across the water, the keeper looks out at the horizon one last time. The sea is vast, the sky is infinite, and the world is at peace. The rhythmic pulse of the surf continues, a heartbeat that has been beating since the beginning of time, a sound that carries the promise of rest, of continuity, and of the long, slow drift into sleep. The timber of the ships, the stone of the tower, the oil of the lamp, all these things are part of the same maritime tapestry, woven together by the wind and the salt and the tireless movement of the water. There is no hurry here, Only the patient accumulation of moments, the steady progression of the seasons, and the deep, enduring silence of the great wildernesses of the world. The fog begins to lift, revealing the jagged coastline and the endless grey of the sea, a landscape of stark, monochromatic beauty. The keeper sits for a moment longer, his hands resting on the cool wood of the table, listening to the silence of the tower, a silence that is full of the echoes of the sea and the whispers of the wind. In the Arctic, the snow continues to fall, a soft, white shroud that covers the ships and the ice alike, blurring the lines between the earth and the sky. It is a world of pure, unadulterated white, a place where time seems to stand still. The logs remain in their chests, the journals on their shelves, containing the thoughts and observations of men who have looked into the heart of the winter and found a quiet strength there. The warmth of the galley stove, the smell of the tea, the steady rhythm of the ship's heart, these are the things that sustain them, the small, domestic comforts that make the vastness of the north seem less daunting. The lighthouse keeper stands and begins his final rounds of the morning. He moves through the rooms with a practiced ease, his footsteps muffled by the thick walls and the heavy air. Everything is in its place, the brass polished, the floor swept, the oil replenished. He is a man of order in a world of chaos, a keeper of the flame in a world of shadows. As he looks out at the rising tide, he feels a deep sense of connection to all those who have come before him, all the watchers and the wanderers who have navigated these waters and recorded their stories in the logs and ledgers of the sea. The day unfolds with a slow, deliberate grace, the light growing stronger but never losing its cool, silvery quality. The waves continue their long, rhythmic march toward the shore, the sound of their breaking a constant, soothing presence. The world is vast, the ocean is deep, and the light is steady. There is nothing more to be done but to wait, to watch, and to listen to the quiet, unhurried voice of the sea. The chronicles of the maritime world are written in the salt and the stone, in the ice and the timber, and they tell a story of endurance, of patience, and of the deep, enduring peace that can be found in the heart of the great waters. The quill is laid to rest, the ledger is closed, and the room is still. The only sound is the soft ticking of the clock and the distant, muffled roar of the surf. The keeper leans back in his chair, his eyes closing as he surrenders to the rhythmic pulse of the world. The light of the day is soft and grey, a gentle blanket that covers the tower and the sea, bringing with it a sense of profound and lasting calm. The journey continues, the watches change, the tides turn, but the essence of the sea remains the same, a vast, rhythmic, and infinitely peaceful presence that cradles the world in its deep, blue embrace. The 17th of November, in the year of our Lord 1874, and the wind has at last found a steady, low-humming note against the stone casing of the lantern gallery. It is a sound that does not rise or fall, but lingers like a sustained chord on a great, salt-dampened organ, vibrating through the 3-foot-thick granite walls of the Skellig light. Here, in the watch-room, the air smells perpetually of whale oil, charred wick, and the cold, mineral scent of wet stone. I sit by the small iron stove, whose belly glows a dull, comforting orange, casting long and rhythmic shadows across the open ledger on my knees. The ink in the well is thick, sluggish from the cold that seeps up through the spiral stairs, yet the pen moves with a deliberate, unhurried grace. There is no haste here. Time is measured not by the ticking of the clock, but by the slow rotation of the great lens, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the clockwork weights descending into the darkness of the central shaft, and the steady, pulse-like sweep of the white beam across the churning blackness of the North Atlantic. Outside, the world has dissolved into a grey infinity. The sleet comes in long, slanted lines, drumming a soft, percussive tattoo against the thick glass panes of the lantern room. It is a sound that invites sleep, a constant, gentle abrasion that smooths away the sharp edges of the day's labor. Earlier, during the low tide, I descended the lower galleries to inspect the iron moorings. The rock was slick with kelp and frozen spray, the salt crusting on my heavy wool coat until it felt like a suit of stiff, white armor. The sea was a deep, bruised purple, heaving with a slow and rhythmic breath, the swell rising and falling against the barnacled cliffs with a sound like a distant, muffled cannonade. There were no ships to be seen. The horizon has vanished, tucked away behind a veil of mist and spray, leaving this tower as a solitary spark in a vast, indifferent void. It is a quietude that settles deep in the marrow, a stillness that belies the motion of the waves. In the journals of the HMS Resolute, recovered from the ice grip of the Melville Sound years prior, there are entries that mirror this same profound isolation. I read them by the light of the secondary lamp, their copperplate script faded to the color of dried tea. The lieutenant wrote of the silence of the Arctic night, a silence so heavy it seemed to have a weight of its own, pressing against the hull of the ship until the timbers groaned in protest. He spoke of the frost rime that grew like delicate, crystal ferns along the brass fittings of the sextants, and the way the moonlight turned the vast, fractured ice fields into a landscape of cold, blue fire. They were frozen in for 11 months, the ship becoming a stationary island in a sea of solid white. They spent their days in a slow, methodical routine, clearing the decks of snow, checking the barometers, tending to the dogs whose breath rose in silver plumes in the frozen air. There is a peace in such a record, a sense of human order maintained against the immense, silent power of the elements. The oil in the reservoir is holding steady. I climbed the ladder an hour ago to trim the wicks, my movement slow and practiced in the cramped space of the gallery. The heat from the flame is a localized summer, a small pocket of warmth that makes the surrounding cold feel even more profound. The brass of the reflectors is polished to a mirror sheen, capturing the golden glow and flinging it out into the dark. One must be careful with the oil, it is the lifeblood of the station. It flows through the copper pipes with a faint, viscous gurgle, a sound that is strangely liquid and soothing amidst the dry rattling of the sleet. I watched the mercury in the cistern, the silver liquid shivering ever so slightly with the vibration of the wind. It is 30 degrees, and the barometer continues its slow, majestic descent into the lower registers, signaling a prolonged period of heavy weather. But here, within the stone, there is only the scent of beeswax and the soft, dry warmth of the fire. I think of the supply schooner, 3 weeks overdue now, and the thought brings no anxiety, only a quiet contemplation of the pantry shelves. There are the heavy, iron-bound casks of salt pork, the sacks of flour that smell of sun-drenched fields, and the stone jars of pickled cabbage. The inventory is a litany of endurance. Everything is stored with a geometric precision, a place for every tin and every coil of spare rope. In the hold of an Arctic vessel, the storage was even more vital. The logs describe the packing of the hold as a sacred task, the lemon juice to ward off the scurvy, the canisters of preserved meats, the heavy crates of coal that would be burned sparingly, lump by lump, to keep the damp from the sleeping berths. I can almost feel the texture of the damp wool blankets they wrap themselves in, the smell of the tallow candles, and the sound of the wind whistling through the frozen rigging, a sound like 1,000 tiny flutes. The great lens continues its revolution. It is a masterpiece of glass and light, a series of concentric rings that capture the stray rays and forge them into a single, piercing spear of clarity. I find myself watching the dust motes dancing in the beam, tiny golden specks suspended in a column of light. They move in slow, chaotic swirls, unaffected by the gale outside. There is a hypnotic quality to the rotation, a steady, mechanical heartbeat that governs the night. I have learned to time my breathing to it, 1 breath for the light, 2 for the dark. In the journals of the lighthouse keepers of the outer reaches, one often finds these notes on the inner life of the tower. They write of the way the light catches the wings of a passing gull, or the way the sea spray creates miniature rainbows in the air even at midnight. It is a life of minute observations, of finding the infinite in the small and the repetitive. The tide is turning now. I can hear the change in the water's voice, a deeper, more resonant thrumming as the Atlantic begins to push back against the rocks. The kelp forests below will be swaying in the dark current, their long, amber fronds reaching out like the tresses of some ancient sea deity. In the logs of the Discovery, there is a passage about the kelp in the southern latitudes, how it grew so thick it could foul a ship's rudder, a dense, underwater jungle that muffled the sound of the oars. Here, it is the same, a hidden world, silent and cold, existing just beneath the froth and the foam. I imagine the fish drifting in the lee of the underwater ledges, their gills moving slowly, their silver scales dull in the absence of the sun. The world is mostly water, a vast, undulating weight that cradles this small spark of human intention. My hands are calloused from the ropes and the cleaning rags, the skin stained slightly with a grey smudge of lead and oil. There is a satisfaction in the cleanliness of the instruments. The sextant in its mahogany box, the chronometer ticking with a faint, metallic pulse, the brass telescopes that allow one to peer into the grey distance. These are the tools of the navigator, the means by which we fix our place in a shifting world. In the Arctic logs, the officers speak of the difficulty of taking a sighting when the horizon is a blur of ice and mist. They had to wait for hours for a single, fleeting glimpse of the sun, standing on the heaving deck with frozen fingers, trying to catch a moment of celestial clarity. And when it came, it was a moment of profound quiet, a brief communion with the stars that fixed their position on the charts. I turn a page in the ledger. The paper is heavy and cream-colored, the edges slightly softened by the humidity. I record the wind direction, north-northwest, and the state of the sea, heavy swell. These are the only words needed. They are a shorthand for a world of motion and power. I think of the men who sat in this same chair 50 years ago, writing these same words in the same steady hand. There is a continuity in the watch, a long line of shadows stretching back through the decades, all of us bound by the same duty to the light. The lighthouse does not change, though the sea gnaws at its base and the wind scours its face. It remains, a silent sentinel, a monument to the idea that even in the deepest dark, there is a path to be found. The sleet has turned to a fine, dry snow. I can see it now, drifting through the beam of the light like a shower of silver sparks. It settles on the iron gallery railing, forming a soft, white crust that buffers the sound of the wind. The tower feels even more insulated now, wrapped in a cold, white blanket. I take a sip of tea, now lukewarm, and the taste of the tannin is sharp and grounding. In the expedition logs, they speak of the luxury of a hot drink, the way the steam would rise and vanish instantly in the frigid air. They would sit in their cabins, the walls lined with cork to keep out the frost, and listen to the ice grinding against the hull, a sound like breaking glass, or the low, mournful lowing of cattle. They lived in a world of white and blue, where the only color was the red of the ensign or the yellow of a flickering lamp. The clockwork weights are nearing the bottom of the shaft. It is time to wind them again. I stand, my joints slightly stiff from the long sit, and move to the heavy iron crank. The movement is slow and rhythmic. Turn, click, turn, click. I can feel the weight of the lead as it rises, a slow accumulation of potential energy that will keep the lens turning through the small hours of the morning. It is a physical task, one that requires a steady application of strength, and it brings a pleasant warmth to the shoulders. The gears mesh with a precise, oiled sound, a testament to the engineers who forged them in the foundries of the mainland. Everything here is built to last, to withstand the slow erosion of time and salt. Once the weights are reset, I return to my seat. The fire is dying down, the coals settling into a bed of glowing embers that look like a distant city scene from a great height. I do not add more wood. The warmth will linger in the stones for hours. In the journals of the Franklin search parties, they write of the abandoned camps they found, the neat piles of tin cans, the stacks of frozen books, the small, poignant reminders of a life interrupted. They found a copy of the Vicar of Wakefield in a boat on the ice, its pages stiff and yellowed, a piece of home carried into the absolute wilderness. There is a comfort in books, a sense of a shared human voice that transcends the silence of the sea. I look at my own small shelf, the Bible, a volume of seafaring charts, an old book on the tides, and a collection of poetry whose spine is cracked from many readings. They are quiet companions in the night. The wind has shifted slightly, now coming from the north. It brings with it a sharper cold, a breath from the polar ice caps that makes the glass of the lantern room ring with a higher pitch. I imagine the icebergs drifting far to the north, great, silent cathedrals of frozen water, carved by the wind and the waves into fantastic shapes. They move with a slow, majestic indifference, their deep blue hearts hidden beneath a surface of brilliant white. In the logs, they are described as islands of crystal, beautiful and treacherous, capable of crushing a ship as if it were a walnut shell. But here, they are only a thought, a distant reality conveyed by the chill in the air. The rhythm of the light is a lullaby. Sweep, and the dark returns. Sweep, and the world is revealed for a fraction of a second, the white foam on the rocks, the glisten of the wet slate, the grey expanse of the churning water. It is a cycle that has no end, a loop of light and shadow that mimics the beating of a heart. I find my eyelids growing heavy, the steady pulse of the lighthouse working its way into my thoughts. The ledger is nearly full. Only a few more pages remain before I must start a new volume, a fresh record of the wind and the tide. There is a peace in the finishing of a book, a sense of a period of time neatly bound and put away. The seabirds are quiet tonight. Usually, one can hear the kittiwakes crying from the ledges below, their voices thin and piercing against the roar of the surf. But in this cold, they have tucked their heads beneath their wings, huddling together in the crevices of the rock. They are survivors, like us, built to endure the salt and the spray. I think of the penguins the explorers saw in the far south, standing in their thousands on the ice, a silent, feathered army waiting for the sun to return. Nature has a way of settling into a long, patient wait. The winter is not a season to be fought, but a season to be inhabited, a time of slow movements and deep reflections. The oil lamp on my desk flickers. I reach out and adjust the wick, the flame steadying and casting a warm, amber glow over the room. The shadows of the brass instruments stretch across the wall, long and thin like the fingers of a clock. The watchroom is a world unto itself, a small, circular space where the complexities of the world are reduced to a few essential truths. The oil must be replenished, the lens must turn, the record must be kept. It is a simple life, and in its simplicity, there is a profound restfulness. There are no voices here but the wind and the sea, no demands but the mechanical needs of the light. In the logbook of the schooner Mary Celeste, before the mystery took hold, the entries were mundane and steady, calculations of longitude, notes on the weather, the daily ration of water. It is the mundane that is most comforting, the evidence of a life lived in regular, predictable patterns. Even in the most remote corners of the world, men sought to create a sense of home, to establish a routine that could ward off the vastness of the horizon. They polished the brass, they scrubbed the decks, they mended their clothes by the light of a single candle. It is the small, repetitive actions that tether us to the world. The snow is falling more thickly now, the flakes larger and more languid. They drift past the windows like white feathers, occasionally sticking to the glass before being swept away by the wind. The world outside is becoming a soft, blurred landscape, the sharp lines of the cliffs and the seawalls dissolving into a grey-white haze. It is a beautiful, silent transformation. The lighthouse stands at the center of this white world, a pillar of fire in a frozen garden. I feel a deep sense of security within these walls, a knowledge that the storm can only reach so far. The granite is unyielding, the iron is strong, and the light is constant. I think of the watchman's sleep, that light and rhythmic slumber that is always attuned to the sounds of the station. He sleeps with one ear open for the change in the wind, the sound of the clockwork, or the distant whistle of a ship's horn. It is a sleep that is not a turning away from the world, but a deeper immersion in it. Even in rest, he is part of the machinery of the night. I will soon lie down on the small cot in the corner, wrapped in the heavy, salt-scented blankets, and listen to the breathing of the tower. The sound of the weights, the hum of the wind, the rhythmic sweep of the light, all of these will weave together into a tapestry of sound that will carry me into the morning. The logs of the 19th century expeditions often end with a simple phrase, "All well on board." It was a statement of fact, a summary of a day survived and a duty performed. As I prepare to close my own ledger for the night, I feel the truth of those words. The light is burning bright and steady. The oil is sufficient. The sea is restless, but the tower is firm. There is a profound contentment in this knowledge, a quiet joy in the fulfillment of a simple task. The world is vast and cold and full of shadows, but here, in this small circle of light, all is well. The ink on the page is finally dry. I close the book with a soft thud, the sound absorbed by the damp air of the room. I stand and walk to the window one last time, looking out at the white swirl of the snow. The beam of the light cuts through the darkness, a long, golden finger reaching out across the waves. It is a beautiful sight, a testament to human ingenuity and persistence. I turn away from the window and move toward the cot, the floorboards creaking softly under my feet. The movement is slow, unhurried, a final transition into the stillness of the night. The fire is now a bed of silver-grey ash, with only a few pinpricks of red light remaining. The room is dim, the only light coming from the secondary lamp and the stray reflections from the lantern room above. I settle into the cot, the wool blankets heavy and warm against the chill. The smell of the sea is faint here, replaced by the scent of old wood and dry paper. I close my eyes, and the rhythm of the lighthouse takes over. Sweep, and the dark. Sweep, and the light. It is a heartbeat, a pulse, a promise. The night is long, but it is a night of peace. In the journals of the long-dead explorers, they spoke of the aurora borealis, the great curtains of light that would dance across the Arctic sky. They described them as silken banners of green and violet and gold, shifting and shimmering in the silent air. I imagine them now, far to the north, lighting up the ice fields where the ships lie frozen. They are a reminder that even in the most desolate places, there is beauty. And here, on this rocky outpost, the lighthouse is our own aurora, a man-made light that dances against the dark. It is enough. The wind has dropped to a low, mournful sigh. The snow continues to fall, a silent accumulation that will greet the dawn with a world redefined. I feel the edges of my consciousness softening, the thoughts of the day drifting away like the snow past the window. The logs are finished, the weights are wound, the wicks are trimmed. The watch continues, but for now, it is a watch of the spirit, a quiet vigil held in the heart of the storm. The sea logs tell us that the ocean is a great mystery, a place of infinite depth and power. But tonight, it is simply the cradle in which this small light rests. I think of the harbor ledges in the ports far to the south, the long columns of figures, the names of ships and captains, the cargoes of spice and timber and silk. They represent a world of movement and commerce, of bustle and noise. But they all depend on these quiet outposts, these silent sentinels that mark the way home. We are the guardians of the threshold, the keepers of the gate. It is a humble duty, but one that carries the weight of the world. And in the quiet of the night, that weight is not a burden, but a comfort. It is our place in the order of things. The lighthouse is a clock that never stops. It measures the passage of the night in degrees of rotation, in gallons of oil, in the slow descent of the weights. It is a mechanical certainty in an uncertain world. As I drift toward sleep, I am grateful for that certainty. I am grateful for the stone and the glass and the flame. I am grateful for the silence that follows the storm, and the snow that covers the world in a mantle of peace. The Maritime Chronicles are full of tales of adventure and peril, but they are also full of moments like this, moments of profound stillness, where the only thing that matters is the steady pulse of the light. The shadows on the wall are still, the pendulum of the clock ticks with a soft, hypnotic regularity. The world outside is a grey-white dream, a landscape of water and ice and wind. But here, inside the tower, there is only the warmth of the blankets and the rhythmic breathing of the sea. It is a good night for sleeping. The work is done, the record is complete, and the light is shining. All is well. The sleet has stopped, and the snow is a silent veil, and the Atlantic is a vast, dark heart beating against the shore. All is well, and the night is deep, and the watch is held. The long, slow sentences of the sea logs echo in my mind, a poetic and dry litany of endurance and peace. They speak of the timber and the brass, the oil and the wick, the tide and the stars. They are the words of men who knew the value of a steady light and a quiet room. They are the words that carry us through the dark, toward the first grey light of the morning. I am part of that long, silent history, a single entry in a vast and ancient ledger. And as the great lens turns above me, casting its golden spear into the night, I find myself finally, completely, at rest. The rhythm of the light continues. Sweep, and the dark. Sweep, and the light. It is the last thing I see before the dreams take hold, a flash of gold against the grey, a spark of hope in the heart of the North Atlantic. The 19th century is a world of paper and ink and stone, a world that moves at the speed of the wind and the tide. It is a slow world, a quiet world, a world that knows how to wait. And I will wait with it, here in the heart of the tower, until the sun rises once more over the edge of the sea. The snow is falling, the weights are turning, and the light is bright. All is well. All is well. All is well. The lamp oil in the primary gallery burns with a steady, amber patience, casting a soft glow against the thick, curved panes of the lantern room. It is the 4th hour of the middle watch, the time when the world seems to hold its breath between the departing tide and the slow arrival of the grey northern dawn. Outside, the Arctic wind has softened to a low, rhythmic sigh, a sound like heavy silk being drawn over the frozen surface of the sea. There is no urgency in the air, only the immense, cold stillness of the ice pack and the quiet ticking of the clockwork mechanism that rotates the great Fresnel lens. Each tooth of the brass gears meets its counterpart with a muted, metallic click, a heartbeat for the solitude of this stone tower. Here, at the edge of the known charts, the logs are kept with a hand that does not tremble, recording the passage of hours that feel as vast and unchanging as the dark water below. The journal lies open on the heavy oak desk, its pages slightly curled from the salt air and the persistent, creeping damp that characterizes life on the rock. The ink is dark, settling into the grain of the paper in long, sloping lines that speak of years spent in contemplation of the horizon. One entry, dated late in the season of the long nights, notes the arrival of the drift ice, not with alarm, but with the quiet observation of a gardener noting the first frost. The ice comes in plates and hummocks, grinding softly against the base of the lighthouse with a sound like distant thunder muffled by layers of wool. It is a slow migration of white shapes, drifting down from the high latitudes where the sun is currently a forgotten memory. The keeper's hand records the temperature, the direction of the gentle breeze, and the state of the light, ensuring that the flame remains a constant, unwavering point of reference for any ghost ship that might be wandering the periphery of the floes. In the lower quarters, the air carries the scent of seasoned timber, old coal smoke, and the faint, metallic tang of polished brass. A small stove flickers in the corner, its iron belly radiating a warmth that barely reaches the edges of the room, yet provides a necessary anchor against the profound cold outside the thick granite walls. A heavy wool coat hangs from a peg, its fibers stiff with dried salt, smelling of the spray and the deep, cold reaches of the North Atlantic. On the small table sits a tin mug of tea, long cooled, and a navigation chart that has been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases have become soft like cloth. The chart shows the jagged coastline, the depths marked in neat, tiny figures, and the vast, empty spaces where the soundings have never reached the bottom. It is a map of a world defined by the movement of water and the permanence of stone, a world where time is measured not by minutes, but by the slow erosion of the cliffs and the gradual turning of the stars. Far to the north, according to the expedition logs recovered from the wintering camps, the ships moved with a different kind of rhythm. They were vessels of oak and iron, braced against the crushing pressure of the ice, their masts stripped of sail and standing like skeletal fingers against the pale, shimmering aurora. The logs of the HMS Resolute speak of the long months of entrapment, when the ship became a static dwelling, a wooden island in a frozen sea. The men spent their days in the dim light of the below decks, the air thick with the smell of tallow candles and damp blankets. They would listen to the ice groaning against the hull, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the timbers and into their very bones. It was not a sound of violence, but of immense weight settling, a slow rearrangement of the world's geography. They found comfort in the routine of the bells, the polishing of the sextants, and the careful measurement of the snow depth on the deck. The narrative of the Arctic is one of quiet endurance, of the way a man's mind expands to fill the silence of the landscape. One officer's journal describes the sensation of walking out onto the ice at midnight, beneath a moon that turned the entire world into a study in silver and blue. The silence was so profound that he could hear the sound of his own breath freezing, a tiny, tinkling noise like falling glass. He wrote of the way the stars seemed closer in the thin, dry air, pulsing with a cold, white fire that mirrored the glint of the frost on the rigging. There was no sense of hurry, no desire to be anywhere but in that moment of absolute stillness, suspended between the frozen ocean and the infinite sky. The ship, with its yellow lamps glowing through the portholes, looked like a fallen constellation, a warm hearth in the middle of a vast, indifferent beauty. Back in the lighthouse, the keeper climbs the spiral stairs to check the wicks. Each step is a familiar vibration, a hollow echo that travels up the stone spine of the tower. The air grows warmer as he nears the lantern room, the heat of the oil lamp trap beneath the copper dome. He moves with practiced, deliberate motions, his shadow stretching and shrinking against the whitewashed walls. He trims a fraction of a millimeter from a wick, his fingers steady, his eyes focused on the blue heart of the flame. The light refracts through the glass prisms, splitting into 1,000 dancing spears that reach out miles across the dark, undulating water. It is a silent dialogue between the tower and the sea, a promise of safety kept night after night, year after year. The oil flows through the brass tubes with a faint, rhythmic gurgle, a liquid pulse that keeps the darkness at bay. The ledgers from the harbor master's office in the southern ports tell of the ships that sailed north and never returned, their names written in a fine, copperplate script that has faded to a soft gray. There is a sense of peace in these records, a recognition that the sea takes what it will and gives back only what it chooses. The lists of cargo, barrels of salted beef, crates of lime juice, bundles of woolen stockings, read like a litany of human fragility against the elements. Yet, there is also a sense of sturdy continuity. For every ship that remained locked in the ice, another arrived at the wharf, its side scarred by the floes, its crew weary but quiet. They brought with them stories of the great white bears, of the mountains of ice that glowed like emeralds from within, and of the strange, haunting songs of the whales that could be heard through the hull of the ship during the quietest hours of the night. The swell of the ocean against the lighthouse base is a deep, percussive thrum, a sound that one eventually stops hearing with the ears and begins to feel in the chest. It is a reminder of the immense power that lies beneath the surface, the slow, rhythmic breathing of the planet. The tide is turning now, the water beginning its long, slow retreat from the rocks, leaving behind pools of still water in the crevices of the granite. In these pools, small fragments of ice float like miniature bergs, and the salt crystals begin to form as the water evaporates in the biting air. The world is a series of layers, the deep, dark water, the skin of ice, the cold, salt-laden air, and above it all, the canopy of the stars, rotating with a majestic, unhurried precision. The keeper returns to his desk and picks up his pen. He records the barometric pressure, which has remained steady for the last 12 hours, indicating a period of prolonged calm. He notes the sighting of a distant ice blink on the northern horizon, a pale, shimmering light that signals the presence of the great pack. It is a beautiful, ghostly phenomenon, a reflection of the ice against the low clouds, a reminder that the world of the north is always there, watching and waiting. He writes of the way the frost has formed patterns on the inside of the glass, delicate, fern-like structures that mimic the plants of a warmer world. They are temporary, fragile things, born of the meeting of the warmth of the lamp and the cold of the night, and they will vanish with the first touch of the sun. In the expedition logs, there are descriptions of the wintering over, when the ships were banked with snow to provide insulation against the killing frost. The decks were covered with housing made of thick canvas and timber, creating a tunnel-like world where the men lived in a state of suspended animation. They spent their time mending sails that would not be hoisted for months, or reading aloud from the few books they had brought with them. The sound of a voice reading poetry or history would drift through the quiet ship, a thin thread of human thought in the vast, unthinking cold. They spoke of the way the mind begins to wander in the darkness, drifting back to green fields and the smell of sun-warmed earth, only to be pulled back by the sharp, clean scent of the ice and the creak of the rudder in its frozen bed. The lighthouse clock strikes the hour, a soft, silver chiming that resonates through the lantern room. It is a sound that marks the passage of time without demanding anything from it. The keeper watches the horizon, where the first hint of grey is beginning to dissolve the absolute black of the sky. It is not yet dawn, but the anticipation of it, a subtle thinning of the darkness that reveals the shapes of the waves and the jagged outlines of the drift ice. The world is slowly re-emerging, defined by the same cold, grey light that has greeted explorers and lightkeepers for centuries. There is a profound comfort in this repetition, in the knowledge that the sun will rise, the tide will turn, and the light will continue to burn until the oil is spent and the day is fully established. He thinks of the logs stored in the archives of the Admiralty, thousands of pages of observations, weather reports, and quiet reflections, all bound in heavy leather and smelling of dust and old ink. They are the collective memory of the sea, a record of 1,000 quiet nights just like this one. Each entry is a testament to the patience of those who watch the water, who understand that the ocean does not operate on a human scale. It is a world of slow movements, of gradual changes, and of a stillness that goes deeper than the surface. The keeper dips his pen once more, adding a final note about the clarity of the air. He describes the way the light from the lens seems to skip across the tops of the waves, a series of bright flashes that disappear into the grey distance. The warmth of the stove has faded to a gentle glow, the embers settling into a bed of soft, white ash. The room is quiet, save for the ticking of the clock and the distant, muffled roar of the surf. The damp wool of his coat has begun to dry, releasing a faint, earthy scent that mingles with the smell of the oil. It is a domestic, peaceful atmosphere, a small sanctuary of order in the middle of the wilderness. He leans back in his chair, his eyes closing for a moment as he listens to the symphony of the tower, the wind in the vents, the hum of the rotating gears, the sigh of the sea. It is a music that he knows by heart, a lullaby for the lonely places of the earth. The ice outside continues its slow, majestic drift, carried by currents that run deep beneath the surface. Some of the floes are large enough to carry their own small ecosystems of frost and snow, miniature continents moving through the dark water. They bump gently against one another, a soft, grinding contact that produces a sound like the rustling of dry leaves. In the growing light, they take on shades of pale blue and translucent white, looking like fallen clouds that have come to rest on the sea. There is no conflict in their movement, only a slow, inevitable progression toward the south, where they will eventually melt and become part of the great, grey ocean once more. In the journals of the 19th century explorers, there is often a mention of the white silence, a state of being where the lack of sound becomes a physical presence. It is a silence that is not empty, but full of the potential of the landscape. It is the silence of the snow falling on a frozen lead, the silence of the stars over the hummocks, the silence of a ship held fast in the grip of the winter. To live in such a silence is to become attuned to the smallest of sounds, the beat of a bird's wing, the crack of a freezing timber, the sound of one's own heart. It is a meditative state, a stripping away of the noise of the world until only the essentials remain, breath, light, and the passage of time. The keeper stands and walks to the window, looking out at the world as it slowly clarifies. The horizon is a sharp, dark line against the pale sky, and the sea is a textured expanse of slate and silver. The light from the lantern is still sweeping across the water, but its power is beginning to wane as the natural light increases. He will soon extinguish the flame, cleaning the glass and refilling the reservoir for the next night. It is a task he performs with the same quiet reverence every day, a ritual that anchors his life to the rhythm of the sun and the moon. The brass fittings of the lamp gleam in the dawnlight, polished to a mirror finish by years of careful attention. He thinks of the men on the HMS Erebus and Terror, sitting around their mess tables in the heart of the ice, the flickering light of the lamps casting long shadows against the reinforced bulkheads. They would have spoken of home, of the smell of rain on dry grass, of the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones. But they would also have felt the strange pull of the north, the way the vastness of the space and the purity of the air gets into the soul. It is a harsh world, but one of immense, stark beauty, a place where the complications of life are reduced to the simple necessity of staying warm and keeping the spirit alive. Their logs, though often brief and focused on the practicalities of survival, carry an undercurrent of awe at the world they were navigating. The tide has reached its lowest point, and for a few minutes, there is a perfect stillness. The water does not move, the wind is silent, and the birds have not yet begun their morning cries. It is the hinge of the day, the moment when the world is perfectly balanced between the dark and the light. The keeper breathes in the cold, salt-tinged air, feeling it fill his lungs with a crisp, invigorating sharpness. He is a part of this landscape, as much as the stone of the tower or the ice of the floes. He is the witness to the silence, the guardian of the light, the keeper of the records that no one may ever read, but which are essential nonetheless. As the first sliver of the sun appears on the horizon, the world is transformed into a landscape of gold and fire. The ice floes catch the light, glowing with an internal brilliance that seems to defy the cold. The sea turns from slate to a deep, vibrant blue, and the frost on the lighthouse windows begins to weep, the water running down the glass in slow, clear droplets. The keeper reaches for the lever to stop the rotation of the lens, the gears coming to a halt with a final, satisfying click. He turns down the wick, the amber flame shrinking until it vanishes, leaving only a thin wisp of smoke that curls up toward the copper vents. The night is over, and the long, quiet day has begun. He will spend the morning cleaning the mechanical parts, wiping away the soot and the salt, ensuring that everything is ready for the coming dusk. He will check the pantry, counting the tins of ship's biscuit and the jars of preserved fruit, his mind already planning the simple meals of the day. He will walk the perimeter of the gallery, looking out at the vast, empty sea, watching for the spout of a whale or the distant sail of a passing vessel. But for now, he simply stands in the quiet of the lantern room, bathed in the soft, morning light, listening to the world wake up. The transition is seamless, a gentle shift from one state of being to another, as natural and unhurried as the movement of the stars. The logs of the Arctic explorations are filled with such moments of quiet transition, of the way the seasons bleed into one another until the concept of time becomes fluid. They speak of the midnight sun, when the day never ends and the world is bathed in a perpetual, golden twilight. They speak of the great dark, when the only light comes from the moon and the stars and the luminescence of the sea. In both states, there is a sense of being outside of the normal flow of history, of existing in a place that is timeless and eternal. The lighthouse, in its own way, is a bridge between these worlds, a fixed point in a shifting landscape, a beacon of continuity in a world of change. The keeper takes his journal and writes the final entry for the watch. Dawn clear. Wind light from the northeast. Ice pack remains to the north. All systems in good order. It is a simple statement, devoid of emotion, yet it carries the weight of his entire existence. It is the record of a duty performed, of a night spent in the service of the sea. He closes the book, the heavy cover meeting the pages with a soft thud, and places it in the center of the desk. The ink is dry, the words fixed on the paper, a tiny fragment of history preserved in the silence of the tower. He descends the stairs, his boots making a dull, rhythmic sound on the stone. The lower rooms are bright now, filled with the reflected light from the sea. He puts on a fresh kettle, the sound of the water beginning to boil, a cheerful, domestic noise in the quiet house. He will eat his breakfast in silence, looking out the small, thick window at the waves, and then he will sleep, a deep, dreamless sleep that is the reward for a night of vigilance. The world outside will continue its slow, rhythmic dance, the ice drifting, the tide rising, the sun climbing higher into the pale, Arctic sky. Everything is as it should be, a cycle of light and dark, of movement and stillness, that has no beginning and no end. The Maritime Sleep Chronicles are not just stories of the sea, but of the way the sea shapes the human spirit. They are tales of patience, of endurance, and of the quiet beauty that can be found in the most remote corners of the world. They are the sounds of the wind in the rigging, the creak of the ice, the drip of the meltwater, and the steady, reassuring pulse of the lighthouse flame. They are the quiet continuity of a world that does not need to hurry, a world that understands the value of a long, slow breath and the peace that comes with the turning of the tide. In the farthest reaches of the north, the ships that were left behind have become part of the landscape, their timbers silvered by the salt and the sun, their hulls cradled by the ice. They are silent monuments to the men who sailed them, to the logs they kept, and to the quiet, steady courage that defined their lives. They rest in a world of perpetual peace, where the only sounds are the wind and the sea, and where the time is measured by the slow movement of the glacier. They are at rest, and so is the lighthouse, and so is the keeper, as the morning settles over the cold, beautiful world. The oil in the cans is still, the brass is cold to the touch, and the light of the sun has taken over the task of the lantern. The world is bathed in a soft, grey clarity that reveals every ripple in the water and every crack in the ice. It is a moment of perfect transparency, a time to be still and listen to the breathing of the earth. There is no more to be said, no more to be recorded. The logs are complete, the watch is over, and the sea remains, vast and unchanging, beneath the wide, pale sky. The silence is complete, a deep and hollow resonance that fills the tower and the soul, a quiet end to a quiet night, as the maritime world drifts into the long, slow peace of the day.